Hey everybody, how's it going? And welcome to the stream. Hopefully all of the tech stuff is working exactly as it should and this broadcast is going out completely without a hitch. My name is Stephen Bauman and today I'm going to be walking you through a little bit of my Quicksketch process. It's a part of kind of lessons that I've taught over the years, but basically just kind of the game changes a little bit when you try to kind of compress the time that you have to actually like make a portrait. I'm going to be drawing mine here. I provided also on the Proko page where the stream is going out, there's an assignments tab and you're going to get the source image that I provided is available there. And also when you do your assignment, when you do like your drawing after whatever, a couple hours or hopefully you've been drawing along with me, you can post it there, and then Stan and his team have hired a bunch of critiquers and stuff. They're going to be going through, kind of giving you comments and feedback about your submissions. After the stream, if I'm not like completely exhausted after talking for 3 hours, I'm going to go through, I'm going to send some comments as well. So make sure that you're drawing along with me and using the source image that's provided. And like I said, there's going to be a team of critiquers out there that are going to be giving you feedback totally free as a part of the Proko 2.0 launch. So go ahead and get started. I'm just going to like start talking about stuff and kind of mentioning a little bit my process. Hopefully I get my head kind of fit into the right position. Really quick, couple things about the materials. It's a Stonehenge paper. I'm using an HB pencil. It's a Mitsubishi High Uni, but I mean, you know, from brand to brand, they vary a little bit, but I like this one. And I've actually pre-toned my paper with a little bit of graphite. So I just took some of the graphite powder that I used or that I had from sharpening my pencil and just kind of brushed it across the paper with a paper towel to create this this kind of tone. You can see like I can lift that off with an eraser. I did that for this stream just because, you know, when you're doing a live stream like this, like time is so much of the essence. You really need to expedite like as many things as you can. And so one of the ways you can do that actually is by going ahead and like I said, kind of toning your paper beforehand. So like eventually once I get my proportions kind of laid out, I'll be able to kind of just erase away a little bit the lights. So I'm gonna get that light shape to kind of pop out pretty fast. Also, this is because, like in a way, when you're trying to do a quick sketch. Now, by the way, let me go ahead and also say, there's a little bit, you know, some differences in between, you know, what I think of as a quick sketch and what maybe is commonly considered as quick sketch. Like usually my drawings will take between like 9 and 12 hours or so. So if you know my work, you know, that's usually the timeline that I'm following. For me, a quick sketch is going to be probably 3-4 hours, which I know like there's, of course, like there's 20-minute quick sketches out there. I get that. But of course, like for me, like I said, that's it's a little bit different. So my kind of main objective in the moment. Oh, what am I doing? I got to do all the housekeeping first. Also, right, if you are able to put in questions into the comments on YouTube or into the Proko page where this video is embedded, I'm going to be answering your questions. However, there's one little thing to kind of consider inside that is that it's going to be questions on the topic of Quicksketch. So it's not like a totally random, like what's your favorite color, like where do you want to go on vacation kind of questions, but more stuff that's kind of related to the topic of Quicksketch. So if you have curiosities, I'm literally going to be talking for the entire time. I promise by the end of this, you'll be totally tired of hearing my voice. But hopefully you have some insights gained from my many years of experience doing this stuff. So like I said, yeah, first objective, and I find it actually kind of comforting in a way, like so many art teachers are going to tell you essentially the same thing, right? And that's how you kind of identify a little bit what are the more kind of universal truths, you know, about drawing and painting. Because like we all have these different processes, but a lot of us are trying to get to a very similar place. So you kind of find the common threads in what you hear from different instructors, and that can kind of inform you about, like I said, what are those what are those kind of more universal truths? Because there's some things that are a little bit about technique and some things that are a little bit specific to the artist, and there's other things that are maybe more, like I said, yeah, just kind of universal. The first part of your drawing really is just going to be about getting the proportions right. If you can get the proportions right, there's so much other stuff that you can do. Like you can really, if you manage to get those kind of dialed in, you have every opportunity to create like a decent drawing. And so like the first part of your process really should be committed almost completely to that. And by proportions, we're just talking about the kind of shape and size of things, right? So proportions are about like the width of the head versus like the height of the head overall. I tend to use comparative measurements. I think probably it's the most useful for certainly like online students, you know. And if you're not maybe totally familiar with like a lot of different measurement techniques, there are several out there. I think, you know, we'll just stick with, you know, talking about comparative, because like I said, that's what I'm going to be using here, and I think that's what's really useful for a lot of you out there. It's just basically taking like one measurement and kind of fitting it into another measurement. So when I look at my source image, what I find is that from like the chin to the brow is very similar as it is from like the high point on the right side of the face to basically like the back line of the jaw. So that's like my first kind of proportional judgment that I'm taking here, right? Now that's obviously just for the face, and you want to kind of echo that out into other things. But I also find that you can like work a little bit in a microcosm, and which is to say like a smaller area, and you can find some, let's not call it truth, but you can find some clarity in a smaller area, and that can help you also kind of build clarity also in larger areas. So if you see me like squinting down and like doing weird stuff with my face, it's because I'm looking over at my source image. So let's see, I got the first set of questions coming in, and Osiris is saying, hey Stephen, do you think Quicksketch is actually useful in terms of learning portraiture? Oh my goodness, Osiris. Yeah, man. Yeah, so no, so it's a fair question, but like, absolutely it is. I find, you know, it's one of those things where, all right, so I'll just tell you about my experience, right? So when I first started studying, I was at a school where there was really no sense of like our quick sketch, like the fastest thing we ever did was maybe like a couple of hours. And that was meant to be a drawing that was like completely without value, like dark and light. It was really just a line drawing. So the idea of doing things quickly was just not in our repertoire, right? It wasn't something that we ever expected to do, like kind of completed drawings in a couple hours. And I think in some ways, like I've actually always suffered a little bit from that part of the training, that I never really referenced how to make a good drawing faster. You know, it was always like I say I take like 9 hours on a portrait. Like a portrait at the school where I went, we would spend 75 hours. So when I got out of school, you know, and I was already teaching by that time, you know, I'd been hired on by the school to be an instructor there. And I couldn't sketch like at all. I mean, if you set me up in front of a model or a figure or a cast or whatever, you set me up in front of anything for like, you know, whatever, 20 hours, I'd hand you a drawing, right? But I couldn't do anything like faster than that. Like not even close, right? So I had to kind of re-educate. And what I figured out in kind of going through all that was that as an artist, like I wanted to be versatile. And this is where, you know, I think it's useful for students to kind of try to grasp a little bit of a big picture about what their education is. You can learn to do things like one way at your school or from the artist you're studying with. I like to take a lot more well-rounded approach. Like I learned to draw, I think, several different times, you know, in my career. I kind of first started doing site size and, like I said, like taking a really long time to kind of produce drawings. And then eventually I started studying artists like Rodin, like sculptors, because they were so much into like form. And that was a weak point for me. Like a lot of the design that I learned was really like kind of flat 2D type design. And because of that, I wasn't particularly kind of strong in terms of describing form, describing volume. So back to your question, Osiris, you ask, is it good for learning portraiture? I think if we're talking about learning portraiture, we're talking about learning to draw. And if you're talking about learning to draw, I think versatility is great. Like you don't want to become somebody who can only operate in one lighting situation, in one studio, over one kind of period of time. You want to have the option. Because also, by the way, for those of you that never watch a live stream with me, this is what happens is I just ramble and ramble and ramble, and hopefully I make a decent drawing. But you're asking, like, is it important? I say, yeah, man, you should absolutely try to learn to draw fast, but also to draw slow. Like, you find, like, look at other artists like out there, look at other students out there, and if you're like me, like you're always self-evaluating and you're always kind of making comparisons and trying to kind of learn by watching the people that study around you. And one thing I notice is that, a lot of people just aren't versatile, like they would go to school, they would study for some years, and then they go out into the world, which is like a distinctly different situation to the studio, and they'd have to like refigure out everything. Like refigure out like how to draw, like in a new circumstance, right? And maybe that's something we'll get into like down the road talking here, but just about how your studio environment, how your source images even shape the way that you kind of learn to draw. I think there's this desire in the world for things to be like binary, for it to be one or the other. Like you can learn to draw, you can draw or not draw, or you can learn to draw or not learn to draw. When in reality, you're learning these series of concepts, and the breadth and the depth with which you learn them is indicative of how, like, I think, how broad the application that you can make of them is. A lot of people, because, I'm online a lot, I'm on Instagram a lot, on YouTube a lot, you encounter people of like really different disciplines, and everybody like wants to separate their disciplines into these black and white groups, like, oh, if you do traditional art, then you don't know anything about digital, or if you do digital, then you don't really know about this, or if you do that, then you don't know X, I just don't really find it to be that way. I think like a lot of the stuff that you learn in design, it applies across a lot of these boundaries. Right, so El Pero Russo says, what are the disadvantages of Quicksketch? Well, yeah, I think that kind of ties in to what I was just saying, that essentially, if you find yourself working only ever in one way, you can wind up in a situation where you don't know how to kind of improvise in a different situation. And you see it a lot, like I said, in terms of like a lot of, like I come from like a tradition of like a lot of slower artists, right? Like a lot of people that work a lot more slowly. You see that they can't like sketch very fast. They can't do something in a shorter period of time. I mean, the same thing's going to be like if you go to a school where, for instance, like all they do is like 15-minute sketches. Guess what? Like when you have to do something that is resolved, over a longer period of time, that's going to be like a totally different world for you. And so, I think also, in some ways, I mean, coming at it from where I did, which is to say, like coming at it from a slower perspective. You notice also like a lot of the people that work faster, when they try to refine, when they try to take that kind of long view, like going past a quick sketch is a little bit hard because your proportions are a little bit more like kind of shaky and a little bit more open. And the more you start to resolve like forms and render forms, like I think the more the differences and the more the inaccuracies kind of starts to tell. So I think that would be, for me, like the major disadvantage would be that you, like I said, you get kind of stuck being the artist that works like in that one way. And that can be a little bit detrimental. I mean, but I mean, in the long run, I don't know. Some people like just want to work in one way, and I think, great, work in that way. But for me, like, it was always important to be versatile. I always wanted to be able to like kind of choose my own adventure a little bit. By the way, I've got my paper stump here, and the tip of that is kind of saturated in graphite. So it's a really, really kind of dirty stump. And you can do this with charcoal or graphite or whatever. You can use either kind of medium or material for that. Whatever you really want to do to make sure that you can create these like slightly softer planes, like so. If you follow my work, I mean, again, probably a lot of you don't, or maybe you do, I don't know. Let me know in the comments, actually, if you already know who I am or not. But if you do follow me, then you understand like a lot of the work that I do has like a strong linear approach. But in the sense that linear wireframe, kind of creates basically these positions for planes. And those planes then help you kind of define shadow and light and define form and structure and so on. So yeah, like this approach, in a way, I'm like kind of mashing together a few different stages. Like I'm taking the proportional search and I'm bringing shadow and light into that, and I'm bringing kind of planes into that search for shadow and light. So it's kind of a combination of a lot of different things, which is eventually, like, when you quick sketch, it's something you really got to get used to, is you got to like kind of chuck it all out there. You got to get a bunch of stuff on the paper so that you can react. I mean, if you, for instance, you're somebody that, I was just doing a live stream actually with my my Patreon subscribers about, that was about perfectionism, right? Like, and that kind of, all the kind of worries and kind of fears that can go along with perfectionism. And one of the things that kept like kind of coming up consistently for that group of people was that kind of fear of starting out, right? Like that fear of a blank paper where you're just like going, oh, I don't want to make a mark because the first mark that I make is like the first thing that I do wrong, essentially. And I think quick sketch is a kind of great exercise to kind of get you out of that, because like you can't just wait forever. You just gotta like, you just gotta puke it up onto the paper, and then you can like fix it. You can work with it at that point. So it's great to kind of get over that. If you feel like you're somebody that has that anxiety, that fear, which, by the way, it's a real thing. It's not, yeah, whatever, by the way, whatever your worry or whatever, the thing that you feel like is your weakness in drawing and painting, like, believe me, there's 100,000 other people out there with the exact same problem. So in no way are like you alone. So that sense of concern about the blank page, it's a real thing. It's a real anxiety. A lot of people have it. So, just take it as it comes and try your best to kind of take on projects. I think this is a cool thing for students to consider, is like you can take on projects that address exactly the problems that you have, which is to say, if you have a problem with starting out, Quicksketch is a fantastic way to kind of free yourself from those shackles. It's kind of more like consequence-free drawing. Like, I think we always get into these projects, and I say we've all done like the same stuff, basically. If you're an art student, you're like learning to draw, then you've had the same experience as me, you've had the same experience as Stan. Like, it's actually like so common and so like fairly universal, that is also something I find kind of like pretty encouraging. But yeah, so if you have like a particular issue, like I said, like that kind of fear of starting out, there's exercises you can do that target that, But yeah, so more questions coming in. Lesigo Kaulis is asking, is getting used to the guidelines a bad thing? What is a guideline? What is a guideline? I don't know what a guideline is. Like a grid, or, yeah, I don't know. If you could clarify the question, Lesigo, I'll answer it. Let's see. So I'm getting my questions from you guys on a Slack channel, and I guess there's like also a conversation going on in the Slack channel. So I have to skip over here. Mark Manthorpe asks, if you're comfortable with Quicksketch, would you say it's an idea to experiment and play with drawing like character or cartoonify the face as long as it's recognizable from the source material? Yeah, I mean, right? In a way, like all things are, all things can be useful. It's something I try to tell my students a lot is that any drawing that you're doing is going to be a learning experience, so that's good. But if you're really wanting to learn how to do a specific thing, there's ways to optimize. There's ways to make the most effective use of your time, and that's usually what I'm pretty interested in. So, like if you were trying to learn like one discipline, like let's say, for whatever this definition is worth, like classical portraiture. If you're trying to learn that, I would say that there's a lot of like hard skills that you can focus on inside of that could probably use your attention more than something like this. But if you're wanting to go more into something that is how did you put it? Let's see, like a caricature. I think that all the same like rules are going to apply in a sense, right? Like there's still light and shadow, and there's still like design is still something that you can kind of learn from your experiences with like classical portraiture, for instance. So yeah, I mean, and of the like art directors that I've known, a lot of them. Well, all right, let's say the art directors that I know that are in like the professional sphere, which is to say, like they need a job done from their artist. It's not something where the person is just tasked to imagine something. Like a lot of times they'll ask, like, you got to use a reference. I mean, that's just a way to get there faster. A way to get from A to B with less, I don't know, less work. But yeah, that's a little bit. I'm a little bit out of my depth on that. Like I don't necessarily work in. I just teach people how to draw stuff that looks like stuff, and kind of, yeah, paint stuff that looks like stuff as well. I know probably a lot of you aren't oil painters. I know that, or I think I don't know. Maybe you are. I think Stan's audience. A lot of people are out there for a lot more for drawing than for painting. But if you feel like that is an incorrect assessment, just let me know. Yeah. So let's see. G. Robles says, I had the opposite training in that I was taught to draw quickly, 20 minutes to 4-hour poses and week-long poses. I have trouble slowing down and spending a long time on a drawing. This is a real thing, and it just speaks to this concept I was bringing up that, like learning to draw is it's not like a binary thing. It's not like you can draw or you can't draw. It's all kind of contextual. Like I said, I learned to draw in these like perfectly orchestrated studios with north-facing skylights, and like it couldn't have been a more like perfect circumstance in which to learn to draw. That being said, when I went out into the world and I had suboptimal situations, then it became really challenging because I hadn't drawn in suboptimal situations. I'd drawn in perfect situations. Now, I don't think you want to say like that. Sorry, I got to make this measurement, and it's a really dicey one. I think teachers do the right job in telling you what like the optimal situation is. You don't want studios to have bad lighting, but I think you also have a duty to teach students something that allows them to be versatile, allows them to like make their own choices. Because knowing my experience, like from, for instance, like I taught at the Florence Academy for maybe like 12, 13 years. And I taught always in the studio. It was always, figure painting and figure drawing and portraiture and yeah, like bargs, all the things that you learn in a proper atelier. But like I had students that would go out and they'd be plein air painters. So value recognition is going to be the same. Shapes are going to be the same. Designs, like all these things are going to kind of apply a little bit across those boundaries. But like if I only taught them how to like measure and how to do site size, I think they would have had a much harder time transitioning into eventually like the job that they really wanted to have, which was like I said, like maybe a plein air painter or something. Right, so I've got a little bit of the head kind of on the paper. I was thinking about this one, obviously today, you know, before the stream, I was thinking like, what kind of crop do I want to do? And like, you know, do I want to like show the whole head? Do I want to get into like the rhythm of the hair kind of going through? And I can be honest with you guys and girls, like I don't know. I didn't really make a decision, so I don't know. Like I might even just like keep it just to this, just the like fleshy kind of structural parts and kind of leave the hair out of it. But I do like drawing hair as well. But maybe it's like, you know, when you're starting on one of these drawings, you kind of can like overcommit to like what you think you can kind of do. Actually, let me go ahead and real quick, I'm just going to move this over a little bit so it's centered. Yeah, there we go. That's better. Right, so like I said, yeah, you can kind of overextend yourself a little bit in terms of like the amount of time that you can kind of spend doing something. So I was thinking like, all right, Steve, maybe try to like rein it in a little bit, you know, try to choose a composition that can fit into the time that you have. So I'm starting to like place the features a little bit. I just want to find that tear duct, and it kind of lines up a little bit with the wing cartilage, that lateral edge of the wing cartilage here in the nose. And her eyes like have this actually like this tilt inward. Like once we get towards the center line of her head, like her tear duct is a little bit lower than the outside corner, which is a really like cool effect to find in a model. Like you don't find it very often. It's why I've worked with this model for like years and years and years. If you know my work again from like Insta or other platforms and stuff, you'll definitely like have seen, you know, drawings and paintings that I've made of her before. So, but yeah, she's got that cool look, you know, that it's kind of easy to make a good-looking drawing of her as long as you just make her look like she looks, you know. You don't have to do like a lot of, and this is something too, you know, just in terms of aesthetics and, you know, just stuff that we think about as artists. You know, there's a lot of, and I get this question a lot also like on social channels and things, is I think that students get into their heads a lot that they really need to invent a lot to make something look very beautiful. And whether or not that's true, I'll just give you my kind of 2 cents. So I find like the deeper I just look into the subject itself, like the more kind of beautiful stuff I feel like I can reveal in it, the more beautiful stuff I can kind of find in it. So for me, like it's never really been the case that I felt I needed to massively invent something, you know, in order to improve on nature. I mean, we're all editors. I mean, to be fair, like what you do add and what you leave out, I mean, that's a part of invention, I guess. But it always seemed to me, I could just always find most of what I was looking for if I just kind of kept chasing after the model. I kept chasing after the proportions and chasing after the likeness and chasing after these things that that allow me to be a little bit more like true to the subject, you know. Maybe that's just an aesthetic thing. I don't want to. There's also like a lot of if you've lived on the internet in the last like whatever 20 years, then you know like people get really polarized and they feel like you have to do things one way or another way, or you have to believe one thing or the other thing. I kind of think there's a lot of truth on different sides of things. But just to say that, like, I think if you're into invention, I think I get so impressed by people that are into that, you know, and I can so get into that like really hyper imaginative artwork, you know, where worlds are being kind of built. I think that's great. You know, it's not what I do, but I don't think like I have to do something in order to appreciate it. It's almost like, you know, I don't make movies per se. I really like movies. I feel the same maybe about like more illustrative artworks and artists. You know, I don't do it myself, but it doesn't stop me from kind of enjoying it or appreciating it or respecting it and so on. So let's see. Jivan Paudial asks, what kind of job opportunities do we have as a sketch artist? How imaginative are you? You know, I mean, the thing that I've found throughout my career. All right, so, I mean, this is kind of a career advice question. And I'll try and like tie it into Quicksketch, even though it's kind of just general career advice. You know, I spoke before about like versatility. The thing that I want to mention here really is about like hard skills. You know, I think everybody when they're kind of starting out and beginning to make artworks or beginning to draw, we really get these romantic notions about like the great artwork that we want to create, and I think that's what you should have. You know, that's where your heart is, that's where your motivation is. You know, I never want to be the person that says like, hey, don't dream too big. I say like dream really big, but also like while you're training, focus on hard skills, because you know, just about every working artist that I know in one form or another teaches. And you know, it's those hard skills that allow you to kind of convey things that are valuable to people, you know? So while you're like working on your art, and I mean, again, it doesn't have to be either or. It's not that you focus on hard skills and then you stop being creative. I think that the hard skills facilitate the creativity eventually. But I would just say that in terms of like, just for starters, like what job do you get as a quick sketcher? I don't really know actually. But I do know this, you know, people on social media really love watching like the journey of an artist, like making representational work. And so I think if you have that in your locker, so to speak, right? Like you have that possibility to draw stuff that looks like stuff. I think there's always going to be people out there in the world that want to see that. And like however you choose to like make your living from that or monetize that, whatever, that's up to you. But I think the core, like the basis for that, like starts with just figuring out how to draw stuff, you know. I have to get a drink of water. All right, Stephen Clark says, I tend to spend a long time on drawings, but at the point it's way overworked. How do you negate this pitfall? It's a cool question. One of the things that, and again, this is, for those of you that already like know me and already work with me and like kind of know me from Patreon or Insta or whatever, like some of this stuff you'll have heard before. But one of the things I'm really big on with kind of creating paintings and drawings is that unlike most other jobs, like you can't just be there, right? You can't, like I can't just halfway be at my easel drawing this. Like I need to be all the way in if it's going to be like any good. And I think a lot of kind of art production is like that. It's got to be, you got to be 110% on to kind of make it work. And so with that in mind, I really try and kind of read my enthusiasm, right? And we all, and again, like this is something that actually like we all know already. We just need to like put a name on it. Like when you have an artwork, like a drawing or something, or a painting going, and like all night, all evening, right? You're thinking of like the next day that you're gonna get in the studio and you're gonna get back to work on that thing. I know I do this all the time, right? Like I'll start out a drawing, it'll be going really well, but of course you get exhausted after however many hours of drawing. And I just can't stop thinking like, ooh, when I get back in the studio, oh, I'm gonna change this thing over to there. I'm gonna move that shape, or I'm gonna like, you know, increase the contrast in this area or whatever. Like I have this flow of consciousness that's just like repeating over and over and over all the cool stuff that I want to do to this drawing. This is your momentum. This is your enthusiasm speaking, right? Now we all know that alternative feeling too, when you know you go into the studio, or like you get up in the morning and it's your day to like go to the studio and you just feel like, oh, oh, that drawing, it's a mess. Oh, I don't want to do it, whatever it is. So you try and kind of read yourself. Now, for me, I do a little bit of a combination. I try to kind of understand my excitement or enthusiasm for the drawing, and also like kind of keep myself a little bit on a schedule, right? This really will come home like for oil painting. Like my oil painting schedule is actually relatively rigid in a sense. Like, so I'll explain that first. But like with oil painting, I'll give myself 3 layers to make the painting, right? So I have an underpainting. I have then a like a first pass in color, and then I'll have like a second pass in color. If by that time I haven't kind of got the painting like mostly where it needs to go, I mean, chances are like I'm probably not really gonna get it. So if I still feel enthusiasm at that point, then I'll keep going. But if I feel at that point like I haven't gotten it and I don't feel enthusiasm, it's time to just get on to the next and like not throw. I think the saying is that you spend good money after bad, or you throw good money after bad. Like you kind of have to know when to like fold your hand a little bit. Because not every project is going to be like perfect. So you put your time in, you put your effort in, and you win some, you lose some. The better you get at doing this stuff, the more you win. But just spending more time isn't necessarily like a guarantee that you're gonna improve the work. A lot of times it's just, was the core concept a good one? Was the core concept something dynamic and interesting, something that worked? And sometimes the answer to that is no. I mean, I have a bunch of stuff around the studio that, some of it's good, some of it's bad. Some of it will be finished, some of it won't be finished. But sometimes, you just chase things down to find out if it'll work or not. Right, so we're starting to get to a place. By the way, I should also mention, like, my camera's a little bit in perspective. So this drawing is going to seem quite a bit more narrow than what the source image is. So just, have mercy on me for that. So I got to take a measurement here. I got some stuff that's majorly off. But yeah, so I was talking earlier about that kind of search for proportions, right? So like the early part of your drawing, it really just needs to be like a pretty raw search for proportions and the shape and kind of structure of the head. And you see, like, a lot of the drawing that I'm doing right now is like really simple. There's not a lot of like angle breaks, not a lot of detail. Haven't drawn the eyes. I probably won't draw those until I feel pretty confident about the construction of the head as a whole. But you want to develop, a strategy for doing this part of the job well. It's I think the hard part, because there's not a lot of the stuff that we really enjoy. Like, everybody loves kind of drawing the eyes and the expression on the face and all that stuff. But in terms of like creating a really good drawing, it is going to be so much about like the structure of the head. And if that works, then you kind of have something. If that doesn't work, then I don't know. I mean, you don't have much. Everybody like talks a lot about likeness and finding the likeness and stuff. But that likeness, that starts down here. So I was just noticing like that I have this chin needs to be like all the way back here. And I have not really allowed it to be in the right position. I had it, I think, too far forward the whole time. Probably, did I need to draw the mouth at all? Nah, probably not. It's like, that's the kind of thing where you can kind of waste your time a little bit. Like, I probably could have been drawing the head a little bit more efficiently just without that, So now I'm like forced to kind of go back and double check a few things. See if I got them right. Yeah. Something else, like, also regarding your drawings and like the search for kind of accuracy and things. I know it's a big subject for everybody. at each stage of the drawing, you need to be realistic about your expectation of accuracy, right? Or I even like to think about it like your expectation of inaccuracy. So like at this moment, I could be moving things. Look, what I just moved the chin like 3 millimeters over, and that should be like acceptable at this stage. As you like progress further and further, the degree to which you find those inaccuracies, should decrease eventually. Until such time, right, as you have eventually, right, you have like things that are kind of fully accurate. Like that's where you want to be. You want to be in a place where you have like a great likeness and a good sense of like structure. By the way, structure, we're just talking about, there's all these like vocabulary terms that can like throw people for a loop a little bit. I remember when I went to school first, my teachers were just like saying over and over and over like this and that about structure. It's structure this, structure that. I didn't have any idea what it meant actually. Like I knew that my drawing should have it and I knew that I wanted it, but like if you had asked me like person to person, well, what is like structure? I would have just gone, I don't know. But eventually we're just talking about a believable three-dimensional form. And, structure doesn't have to be a lot more complicated than that. Achieving it, by the way, is really hard. And there's really a lot that goes into it, a lot more than probably I could, indicate in the course of one live stream. And you all know that. I mean, I think if you've studied drawing at all, you know that you're not going to watch one live stream and get everything sorted. What was I saying though? Something about, structure. We're just talking about believable three-dimensional form, and understanding the various forms of the face is a great way to kind of get your block-ins to be kind of improved, A good way to think about block-ins, and I mean that's where we're at right now, that's what we're doing, is we're just doing like a block-in, is that it should be the simplest possible expression of the subject, right? And every part of that statement is important. A lot of times you'll have, as a student, you'll have a situation where you'll be satisfying one or another part of that need or of that requirement, right? You'll be simplifying something, but maybe you're not really expressing the subject. You'll be expressing the subject, but maybe you're not simplifying enough. And so it's about, like most things, right? It's about finding a balance in between those two requirements, right? You can't oversimplify, because then you don't have anything to compare to your model or to your source image. And you can't like only worry about it looking like them, because then you never kind of break down, the head into like simplified planes. You never really understand things all that well. So again, like most things, it's just about finding a good balance. Let's see. More questions coming in. I'm sorry, I just kind of lost the plot of where the questions were. H. Lewis says, how do you prevent erasing too much or making a mess of the paper when sketching? You keep a light hand always. And there's also something to understand, like there is a technique to keeping a light hand, and it's not particularly complicated. But whenever I'm drawing, I'm always balancing my hand on the paper. Like very rarely do I just have my hand totally in the air and the pencil just like running along the surface. Like that way you tend to like push, and you tend to push that pencil into the paper. You tend to draw up here, again, you're pushing into the paper. Balancing your hand back here, holding the pencil further back. The tip of the pencil on the paper here is feather light. Like I can go across the paper and barely even make a value. So I'm really in control of like how much value application I have. And that's key, because it's about a consistent pressure across the paper that's going to get you an even value. Like when I intend to make like this soft line here, that particular value is a very specific choice. And having my hand kind of balanced on the paper is one of the things that kind of allows me to do that. If you're relying a little bit too much on your hand just being like floating or choking up on the pencil too much, a lot of times that leads to having like a heavier hand, which, of course, eventually in the long run means you have a little bit less control. And this is, I always laugh about this one. Something else that like comes up, I talk about over and over and over with my students a lot, is that, drawing and painting, a lot of it is about being in control. Like you need to be able to conceptualize, conceive of something, and then execute something. And that means you need to be like in control of it. It makes me sound like a control freak, which, you know, that's a debate for another time. But, you know, having a light hand is the way that you kind of preserve the paper. Having a light hand is the way that you make sure that you don't scar the paper. In the way, it, you know, in a sense, like it's a way that you ensure that you have control. And that's so important when you're a professional, you know, is that waiting for happy accidents or coincidences and things. Like, this is not what a professional does. You know, you need to be able to call upon certain techniques. You need to be able to call upon things, you know, in the moment when you need them. So anyway, yeah. Sorry, I'm gonna need a drink of water here. Hamda Aslam says, is it possible to draw a portrait accurately without using construction lines? Hey man, anything's possible, you know. I mean, it's, you know, we live in a universe where so many different things can be done, you know. You can use grid lines, and you could, I mean, you could just project the drawing onto the canvas if you wanted to. You know, there's so many different ways that you can kind of get to where you're trying to go, that to say, is it possible? I mean, it's the easiest answer in the world to say, like, yeah, I mean, of course it's possible. Now, I thought Loomis had a really interesting kind of take on this in his quite famous book. Well, he was saying that basically he kind of split up kind of artists into a couple of groups. Basically, he was talking about, like, in his era, this is like probably a little bit more relevant than it is today, he was talking about commercial artists, right? Like, if you're a commercial artist, like think like Norman Rockwell, right? Was like a commercial artist. Like, he had constant deadlines, and, you know, the paintings needed to be essentially just, you know, they needed to be perfect, and they needed to be on time, and all this stuff needed to these were the criteria for him, like, kind of making work. And it was a lot of money involved. Like, he was paid really, really well. So, like, the need to deliver was, you know, serious. And Loomis said about that, like, yeah, if you needed to be a commercial artist, like, you should just, like, trace it out and get it down, and then work on the modeling and values and stuff and whatever. But if you wanted to be an artist, like, that knew really how to draw, then learning construction was imperative. And I thought that was really, I really liked that, partly because it, like, kind of fits my worldview, that it's like you have all these options. Like, if anybody says to you, this is the one way to draw, like, you have to draw this way, it's just not true. You know, I mean, I tend to talk about practicality. I tend to talk about viability. You know, if you want to learn how to sketch heads and how to, like, draw heads, or even more so to, like, draw out, you know, from your memory and things, you know, learning about construction is huge. Yeah, so I think it's really important. Let's see. MJ Artwork says, hi, Stephen. You mentioned that there are levels of expected degrees of inaccuracies at each level. My question is, how accurate do you want to be in the block-in stage? As accurate, this is a bit of like a Yoda type answer. You want to be as accurate as the information you have on the page allows you to be, right? So I talked about how, like, in the initial stages, you have these really big shapes, right? Well, the thing about big shapes is they're not subtle. So, like, I can't compare, you know, 10 different angle breaks on either side of the shape to ensure that it's accurate at all kind of phases of the kind of 2D space it's occupying. I just can't. So there will be, like, a maximum amount that you will be capable of achieving with big kind of blocky shapes. And that's not to say, like, oh, those big blocky shapes are bad. It's just that you need to exploit them to the greatest degree possible kind of while you have them, and before you kind of move into more subtle shapes. So yeah, the concept, right, is to go from the broad to the specific. And that's not just something that's, like, optimal, that's almost something that is required by being broad, required by being, you know, simplified. And also, like, the more that you start to work in this way, you know, you're gonna understand really quick that time is ultimately profoundly finite. You only have so much literal time to work on something. You only have so much enthusiasm that you can spend on something. All these things that you're contributing to your artwork, they run out. And so you need to like economize, I think, in each moment. I always think about it like this, like I don't have the energy to go from the final stage of my drawing to knock that back 3 stages to move the eye up. I don't have the enthusiasm for it. I'll drop that drawing or painting and I'll go on to the next one because it's just not viable for me to do that. I'll lose interest, I'll lose passion, I'll start doing like boring work and it won't eventually, like, it won't look good. So why chase after it if the outcome is not going to be anything? By the way, if it's commissioned, sometimes you have to, and that's just like, that's life. But, you know, sometimes maybe you just start that over. So economizing at every stage, you know, just, you know, making sure that your block-in means that you're not going to have to jump back several steps. Like that, for me, is ultimately the thing that you want to avoid, the thing that you can avoid. I think if you're working really, you know, in quite a smart way. There's that great Joshua Reynolds quote that I use constantly, and I'm sure to the great annoyance of my students. They're like tired of hearing it. But he said that I suggest that you block in such a way that, and by the way, I'm paraphrasing. I suggest that you block the drawing in such a way that you don't have to change it afterwards. Which, if you really kind of try to live your life by that, it actually opens up a lot of really fascinating, you know, concepts that you can use in your efforts to make a good kind of drawing and painting. You know, imagine that. Like if you had to draw in such a way that you would not be changing it afterwards. I mean, it speaks to, let's, you know, just real talk. It speaks to needing to go from the broad to the specific. I mean, that's the whole, you know, in a nutshell, the purpose of going broad to specific is so that you don't have to change it afterwards. You don't find yourself like going in circles with your drawing, right? I think I'm going to invest a little bit in some of this hair because I think it looks really cool and I can't kind of keep myself from it. So I'm going to get into some of these shapes. I think they also kind of like tie in well to some of these shadow shapes. By the way, you notice, let's evaluate. There's not really eyes in this yet. It's not really a mouth. Still just working on the big form, the big structure of the head. And guess what? Like I don't have it right. You know, there's parts about it that are, at the moment, that are incorrect. And I got to deal with that. But we're in a decent place with this. You know, it's just not, it's far from arriving just yet. One of the things I actually liked about having the hair is it kind of like sets off, you know, what is otherwise like kind of a dark halftone plane or a shadow plane back here. It kind of sets it off from like the darkness of the hair and kind of makes it more a little bit part of it. See, as I started to kind of outline this, the face kind of like holds together a little bit more. So at the very least, I'm going to indicate some of those great kind of shapes that are kind of popping out of the hair through there. Also, this is a really nice moment where like the highlights on the hair kind of flow through to the highest key lights of the forehead. You can kind of make some nice kind of bold marks through there. Hopefully they look good. Right, so more questions. Fintamb is saying, what do you do in a life drawing session when the lighting is not optimal? For example, when there are multiple light sources and not much shadow. That's tough. That's tough. Yeah, I had a student he was in Chicago, and he was always going to these life drawing classes, and he'd send me, you know, the drawings that he'd make from them. And I mean, it's always, the lighting was just, honestly, it was like probably one of like the worst lighting situations. Just light from every possible angle. You know, none of it was like particularly like constructive lighting. You know, so it created really this big problem for him, and that, he was massively like kind of underperforming, in this life drawing class. And I mean, the best thing you can say is that you would just try to draw structure and not draw light and shadow. But it is one of those situations where I was saying, if you want to be versatile, I think that's what you would do. You'd focus on designing and drawing with line, for instance. That's one way to kind of get around that, because line exists. Like, think about it, right? Like, what happens, we're looking at this picture of this model in this like really nice light. Well, what happens when the light, what if the light is like turned off? Well, this dichotomy here ends between shadow and light, but the eye is still there, the structure of the forehead is still there, the cheekbones, zygomatic bone, the nasal cartilages, all that stuff's still there. So if you can draw that, I feel like you still have something that you can draw. It's not that is impossible to draw in those lighting situations, but you need to be, I think, trained quite specifically for that purpose, which is to say, like, drawing independent necessarily of lighting situations. Yeah, but it's all about structure. I learned a lot of this stuff. It's so weird, because I went through a very formal education at one point. I studied for 4 years at the academy, and like I said, teaching there is also, you're still kind of learning as you're teaching. You're always kind of pushing yourself to have a better grasp on things. But when I went to learn constructive drawing, I started to work on these studies of Rodin's sculptures, because I mostly had to kind of like pick this stuff up, a little bit on my own. I mean, I wasn't, it dawns on me now, like, obviously I should have just kind of like gone on YouTube and tried to like find some cool videos on constructive drawing. But at that time, I know people were doing it, but I'll tell you what, like, I wasn't doing it, right? This is around like 2006, 2007, when I'm starting to kind of realize that I needed to make this change and to learn these things. I know that people were out there doing stuff on YouTube. I'm not at all claiming that there was a lack of information out there. But for me, it seemed like the clearest way to get to something constructive was to study sculptors and study sculpture. Because essentially we're talking about the same thing there. We're talking about three-dimensional reality, and stopping to think in kind of flat reality. So I started studying Rodin and tracing through the kind of rhythms and structures that he would draw, and cross-referencing that to what I knew at the time about anatomy and studying the skull, studying the soft tissues of the body, those kinds of things. And eventually, like, maybe coming to an interesting place where I feel like I had a much better grasp on structural drawing. See, that's one of those digressions. I totally lost the plot. Completely forgot where I was going. Let's see. Right, so John on the Slack chat is saying, I should remind people that I'm taking questions on the website and let people know they can download the reference you're using. So yes, housekeeping, right? This picture that I'm drawing, you can be drawing, should be drawing during this live stream. And also, like, if you're able to draw along with me and you upload your drawing to the assignments tab on Proko.com, he's got a team of critiquers that are going to be out there, giving you feedback on your work. So it's a great way for you to kind of get involved with his site, get involved with some, proper art instruction, totally free, and can make kind of enriched experience out of this for you. So make sure that you're drawing along with me. You can download this image also, not my drawing, but the image up here. You can download that on the assignments tab, and you can also upload your drawing eventually on that assignments tab. Thank you for the reminder, John. Joe Journal is asking, any advice for people who would still be considered beginners but have studied enough fundamentals to understand them, so they're perpetually stuck in the practice stage, which is holding them back? I mean, it's an interesting question, all right, so I'm going to answer it in two ways, one of which is to say that be careful as a student in feeling like you understand the fundamentals. Because I think very often, and I say this because I did it. This is not like an accusation to the world about how they need to be better, but I'm saying that students have a tendency to believe that they know something when in fact, in practical terms, in terms of like what's on the paper, like if you understand it, it should look like you understand it. So your studies should be excellent if you understand all the concepts you're working on. Now, if that's true and you do feel like you're still actually just making studies, I think that one of the things that I recommend a lot to the students that I work with, something I do a lot myself, is actually I use mood boards. Now, some of you, maybe you're familiar with this concept, some of you are not familiar with this concept, but it's basically, I encountered it through, I think somebody who was in like the marketing, like in advertising. So like if you're trying to pitch, right, let's say there's like a, I don't know, there's a vodka company and they are hiring this new advertising agency to promote their new line of beverages, right? Can I do that on YouTube? Maybe this is a bad example. Drink responsibly. Let's say it's a line of perfume. Better. Perfume. Cologne. So you've got this line of cologne and you've got this advertising agency that's trying to get get signed to make the account or the advertising campaign for that product. And so they ask the people that are from the cologne or perfume company, like, what do you want the advertising campaign to feel like? They're like, we want it to be bold and dynamic and like a volcano exploding, So then the advertisers will put together this mood board, a collection of images that the client can respond to see what actually correlates to the vision that they have, right? And this is a way for the advertising company to understand like the visual world that the product makers like want to create surrounding their product, right? Because to say it in the abstract, like, I want to make great art. Okay, fantastic. But that, I mean, it's so broad as to almost be meaningless, right? It means something totally different to like literally everybody that's saying it. So we need to narrow it down. And the best way to narrow it down is to get it out of here and like onto here. So that's what a mood board does, right? You start to collect like your favorite artworks, right? I don't know who it's going to be for you. Like for me, who's on my mood board currently? Like Solomon J. Solomon would be on my mood board, right? The greatest figurative oil painters out there that existed once upon a time. It's not out there anymore, but he would definitely be there. And I would have that. I would have like a dozen other artists or artworks on that mood board. And I would look for the common threads in between them, right? All the work is portraiture. All of it's figurative. So I take away the abstract one or I take away the landscape painting. Yeah, maybe I like landscape, but obviously the vast proportion of portraiture and figurative work to that means that I'm more focused on that. So I try to whittle down the visual world that I'm most interested in and then chase after that. I mean, so that's what I would recommend to you is just try to get a better grasp or like a kind of full understanding of what is the work that you actually want to make. Because I think once you start to know that, you're, what's the word, like, you start to have accomplishable thoughts about it. It's almost that thing where, sorry, I was just thinking about the live stream. I was making so many references to The Office, but and that's what came up in my mind now. But I will spare you all my digressions about Michael Scott and The Office. But essentially, right, you can't focus on unaccomplishable, vast tasks like I want to be a great artist. You can say like, I want to learn portraiture that has, that's in situ, right? Portraiture with interiors around it. That's all the work on my mood board is that. That's what I want to learn. Okay, great. Like we can do that. Like we can focus on the component parts of that as opposed to like just wanting to make artwork with a big A in general. I think that it's almost impossible to kind of move towards that because it's such a nebulous space. So that would be my advice about that. Let's see. Muaz asks, how do you go by deciding what kind of construction methods to use? Something as complex as the head has so many different ways to construct it. It's hard to decide as a beginner which one to choose and focus on. Yeah, well, I mean, some of it is down to like your affinity, you know? Look at the artists that you think are cool, the artists that you like, and sorry, I gotta take a measurement here. Look at the artists that you like and just ask yourself, what are they doing? You can also look at it just from a practical perspective and say that you want to learn, you know, shape construction and shadow and light, and so that's the first way that you do it, and then you learn, you know, 3D kind of wireframe construction. You know, just you kind of take it in paces. You know, I think that in some ways, like choosing your instructor is going to help you answer that question. So, you know, just find an instructor whose work you like, and try to, by studying with them, try to track down what it is they do that makes their work the way that it is. And then after that, you know, again, like part of it too, and this is a really hard one for students, is that you kind of need to get a baseline of education under your belt before you even really know what you like, or you learn to like communicate what you like. You know, like a lot of the words that I'm saying right now, you know, some of them probably resonate with you, but some of them, you know, maybe don't. Like if I'm talking about like structural symmetry, maybe that you're like, huh? You know, you need to kind of learn these things a little bit so you can know, they can like help you to find the direction that you need to go. You know, and that was a big hurdle for me as well. It's like I said, you know, when I got into this stuff, there maybe wasn't quite as much information out there as there is now about it. And so I kind of, when I showed up my first day at the academy, I really knew like less than nothing. Like I knew so little about what I wanted to do, which maybe in some ways like made it easier, because then I was just very compliant. I was like, all right, yeah, you want me to do this thing? You want me to draw a bark for 5 weeks? Okay, I'll do whatever that is, and I'll understand that because you say so, that there should be some benefit to it. Whereas I think, you know, a lot of times we want to make a decision really fast. Like we want to do something for a week and then go, oh, that's useful or it's not useful. You know, art students are probably some of the people that do this the most, is that they decide like sometimes before they even start whether or not something's going to be useful to them. But just try and be open. Try and be open and be a critical thinker. You know, you can do both of those things at the same time. You know, if you kind of get into something, eventually it just doesn't kind of add up to you. It doesn't mean like it's without value. It just means that maybe it's not the thing that you want to study. So kind of you can move on to the next. Like I said, there's so many different ways of kind of going about stuff that you're going to find the one that you have an affinity for if you keep at it, you know? Another question from MJ Artwork. He says, hi, Stephen, what do you actually mean with the concept of design? Do we merely just make cool-looking shapes? That's a bit of a take on something I've said a lot on Patreon and in some of my Patreon lessons, is that, you know, there is a level of design where we are just responding to, is it a cool-looking shape or not? And it feels like it should be more than that. Like it feels like it should be vastly more complicated than that. But at the end, like sometimes that's really all there is to it. It's just like, is it a cool shape or not? Now, we want to define like a cool shape, you know, then you start to get into kind of psychology. But, you know, suffice to say that there are different kinds of lines. You know, you can, I don't want to like draw all over my paper here, but like, you know, you can have lines that are like awesome and cool looking, like S curves, you know, like dynamic, beautiful S curves. Like those almost always look like really cool. And then you can have a line that's like that. And you can say like, oh yeah, well I think that line's cool because individual taste or whatever. But like 99 out of 100 times, like that's the shape that's gonna look, or the line that's gonna look cooler. And shape design doesn't have to necessarily be like more complicated than that, right? It's about, you know, rhythm, and rhythm is something that you can understand, you know, through music. You can understand melody. If something like if a melody seems like pleasing to you, you know, then it has like an interesting interesting pattern, interesting rhythm, you know. And I feel like some of that is a little bit, you pass into that place where it's a little bit less technical and a little bit more emotional, which as a teacher is often a place where I just kind of put my hands up, you know, because I don't want, like, I can't tell people what kind of shape looks cool to them. I can tell them what looks cool to me and what looks cool to probably most people, just by example. But you can't say like only this kind of shape is going to be cool. So you kind of have to like follow your gut a little bit and know where you're at in terms of like what your taste is, because eventually that's how you're going to make your decisions. Like I don't, you know, I'm like making a drawing here. I don't like draw the hair and I'm thinking like, if I connect this angle to that angle, then this angle will lead to that angle and I will have a cool shape. I think just more like, oh yeah, I just want to like let this kind of flow into this shape, and I want to make sure I have like, you know, dynamic lines that aren't all like parallel, and I want different distances in between them and stuff. You know, but it's like, it's kind of stuff you're just doing like on feeling after a while, and that's kind of where you want it to be, I think, eventually. So you can learn like principles of design, and those are like super useful, but eventually like when you're actually drawing, when you're making the drawing itself, you need to be able to like read and react, you know, you need to be able to just find it in the moment. So is it just a cool shape? I mean, that's enough for me in general. You know, there's so many things about drawing that you can calculate and that you can codify and that you can make into, you know, near scientific definition. It's just like shape design is one where I always just felt like, you know, you just gotta let that one breathe a little bit, you know. You don't need to like pin down what's cool about shape design. Like, does anybody remember the does anybody remember? Only the old in the audience will remember with me. The movie Dead Poets Society with Robin Williams. Obviously, I can't hear you out there saying you do or don't remember. I will guess that a few of you know it. And if not, like, it's a cool movie, you should watch it. But in Dead Poets Society, Robin Williams is this poetry teacher, and he, at the beginning of his class, like he comes out and he starts reading this book from, you know, some old white-haired professor who has written a book about all the metrics by which you can decide whether poetry is good or not. And of course, they're like making fun of it, like going, this is just the dumbest way to categorize something as free and without boundaries as poetry, you know? And I feel like shape design is like a little bit like that. As much as I'm like that boring white-haired teacher, you know, going, we need to understand the steps of proportions and so on. Like, I also feel like there's places where you just got to put your hands up and go, you know, sometimes like you have to like develop taste. Sometimes you have to develop your instincts for what you like and what you don't like, you know, and that really matters, you know? And so I can tell you like all the other things. I can tell you about, you know, how to manufacture those shapes, what techniques to use, you know, what kind of materials are going to kind of work together, what concepts you're going to integrate, you know, like all this stuff, like I can tell you. But eventually, if you don't have in your mind somewhere a version of what kind of shapes look cool, I don't know. I mean, I can't make that part happen. Not in a live stream or not in a lesson. You know, I can tell you how I found what I think about shapes, you know what I mean? Like that's how I cultivated my own taste, but that, you know, it might not be your taste. Let's see, let me just get a drink of water here. And Sam Reeves is asking, what is usually the root cause of values being too light? Is it timidity with pressure, fear of mistakes, simply not spending enough time rendering? Well, let me just kind of pull that back a moment, because I think that in general, one of the things that leads to values being too light is because I don't think that people actually understand completely value comparison. So, so how to put this right? So when you talk about keying a drawing, you want to talk about finding the darkest dark and finding the lightest light. So if we look at our source image, right, you're going to see this area of hair behind the ear here, right? And you're going to say that's roughly kind of the darkest dark. Maybe we could say like the black part of her clothing here. which actually isn't my drawing. That's why I kind of chose these areas. And then choose the lightest light. People get a little bit hung up about this. They kind of want to find exactly the lightest pixel. We can just say roughly the lightest light is between these three areas. Now, every other value in here exists somewhere in between those two. Now, whatever I choose the darkest dark to be, right, will establish the relative bottom of the value scale. Meaning that if I make this really, really dark, it requires that I make this dark, simply by virtue of the comparison in between the two in the source image. The same thing kind of goes with the light. If I don't know, like took white chalk and really pushed it into this paper and really pushed it up, it would require me to probably lighten some other areas around it as well to kind of match that kind of comparison. Now, there are true value scales and relative value scales, which is to say the black that is in the source image and the black that is in my drawing here, they're not the same. The black in the source image is like a 10, and this is like a, what, 5? So all the values that I have in here, which are relative to that right now, are in this kind of relativistic value scale. Now, the only reason that I would make values too light would be potentially because I'm not comparing them appropriately, or I'm not creating a like an accountable hierarchy of values, which is to say a comparison of values throughout the entire picture that's related to a darkest dark and a lightest light. So that's a skill, by the way, that you kind of have to learn that skill of value comparison. It's not something that just like kind of shows up one day or like that comes for free when you start drawing. It's very much like a learned behavior. And so when you focus on trying, and there's different exercises you can do for that. You see a lot of people, doing these sphere exercises or a cube or whatever. These are ways that they're using like simplified forms to understand how to organize a value hierarchy. Which, by the way, if you look at my courses on Proko.com, if you'll allow me a brief plug, if you look at my instructor page on Proko.com, you'll find courses there in which I talk in very great depth about exactly these things, but also in a much more kind of structured, organized way than, of course, what you have in a live stream is me just trying my little heart out to make a decent drawing, and also to kind of keep up a conversation with however many people are checking out the stream. So, do I have a proportion? Maybe, I don't know. I mean, it's coming along a little bit. I'm not sure that I have a lot of confidence yet in what's happening down here. Question is, should I include like some crop of the neck, or should I have it just like focused on the head? I think for the sake of it, I might have to just incorporate a little bit some angles for the neck, just because I'm not sure if it's a kind of pose where I can just get away with like the floating head effect. Some of you can kind of just get away with doing some things to it. I think I've drawn that way too far forward. What's the matter with me? The thing also with like live streams is I measure like probably half as much as I should like on a live stream. Like ideally, when you're taking measurements, you should be like kind of going over it 2-3 times, kind of double checking your initial assessments, because we always have this tendency to maybe think that we got it right, or we got something in the right place. It's like that falling in love with, or like, what is that phrase, like kill your darlings, right? The darlings start because we get invested in something that we've made, So I made all these observations, so I put a really high value on them, right? There's even like sort of studies, marketing studies have been done about this stuff, where like people put a higher value on something that they've either discovered themselves or made themselves, and we're like that in a sense, like with the things that we do in a drawing. We kind of fall in love with them because we went out of our way to discover those shapes, to make those measurements, those observations, and that can work against us a little bit in the sense that, again, you need to be like really flexible, and if you're not flexible, you're gonna think that your first indications are good ones, and 99 out of 100 times, they're not so great. That sounds so pessimistic. I didn't mean it to sound pessimistic. I just mean like a lot of things you're gonna have to change. Let's see. Scan Jalal says, do you compare the actual proportions with the average proportions of the head while doing a portrait? Does it help to get a better likeness? I think what you're talking about is like the way that you'll have, you know, for instance, like a Loomis head has a particular set of proportions, and whether I split the difference in between like the average proportions of a head and the actual proportions of the head of the person that I'm drawing. No, I tend to, you know, in my work, you know, I tend to be really, what's the word, like observational in my focus. And that's just the nature of my artwork, like the you know, it's just what I want to do, like that's how I work. So I don't really ever have a lot of need except for the first, you know, maybe 5 or 10 minutes of a drawing. Sometimes like I can start out with a Loomis head, you know, sometimes, or a rough like centerline construction of the head. You know, there's a lot of different ways you can kind of start out a drawing, and certainly, you know, I have different ones that I kind of employ at different times. But in general, no, like I don't tend to do too much of the, you know, like a head is approximately this amount of eye widths or something like that. You know, I find those for observational work, you know, I feel like when I'm doing that, I'm like going across the river to get a drink of water kind of thing. Like I can just observe what's there, and I kind of know a little bit where I'm going to make my comparisons anyway. So yeah, for me, I didn't, you know, find like a lot of value in that, or put a lot of value in that. I think some of it too is if you're working a little bit less referentially, you know, to the model, then that can be like a lot more valuable too. But I'm not, by the way, FYI, this is not black and white. I'm not discounting it, but I'm also not saying that like I find like a ton of use in it. For me, I tend to go a little bit more just to the source, because it's there, you know. I mean, that's my work is observational. It's not, I don't really have any like special need to go around it or anything. Yeah. So I have something on the paper. I'm not gonna say I feel fantastic about it. You know, it's definitely a bit of an ugly duckling at the moment, but I feel like proportionally, like if I just, you know, if I just start to kind of compare these areas across to each other, you know, I feel like some things are kind of lining up pretty well. You know, like I know that the outer edge of the kind of brow ridge here, as it contacts the contour, you know, lines up roughly with the tip of the nose. You know, tear duct and the outer edge of the cartilage of the nose here kind of line up. You know, so some things are going fine. Like I said, there's a lot of like subtle stuff like happening down here that I really need to kind of figure out before I go much further. That's the place where I feel a little bit less clear about. And then, I mean, eventually I'll get to the eyes. It's just a matter of priority, like when do they need to happen? You know, I just feel like it's one of those things where there's so much other stuff I can fix. Like, I don't know, I don't really need to do a lot with the eyes other than just kind of indicate roughly where they're at. So I can use them to kind of compare to other things, you know? Yeah, like, so something I should mention also is that like a lot of what I use, and you just notice that I kind of like just sketched in this little kind of grid here. A lot of what I use is kind of triangulation, right? So it's about like one feature kind of in relationship to where the other features are, and it kind of banks a little bit on that 2D space that we're drawing in, and kind of exploits the flatness of the paper to help you kind of arrange the features in relationship to each other. There's other things you're doing as well where, for instance, and we can just like kind of get into this, but you know, where you're looking at basically like where the zygomatic arch in a pose like this is kind of coming through, and where the kind of bottom edge of that zygomatic bone in the front of the face is, and how that's kind of lining up along with the zygomatic bone on the other side, where that's being expressed at the surface, you're kind of creating structural symmetry kind of while you're going. One of the difficult things about like a 3/4 that's pushed this far is that you don't actually have the other side of the mouth to see. You don't actually have the other side of the nose to necessarily see. So you need to actually kind of conceptualize that like as being around the other side, and how that would necessarily affect the form that we're seeing on the side that we are seeing. So it's a little bit more of a kind of imagination job. So that's another one of those like kind of blurry areas where, I feel like the line between drawing in a constructive way or in an observational way, they kind of blend together a little bit. They're not maybe as separate as we would like to kind of conceive of them as. Yeah. So this is also like a time where I need to kind of focus on getting a few things right, or they're just not going to get there. So just give me a second, folks. I'm going to get back to the questions in just a moment. But I feel like there's a couple areas that are falling short, and I cannot really go forward until they're correct. So yeah, probably, so I normally do about 2 hours in a live stream. I'm gonna be trying to just like push myself to see if I can do 3. I make no promises, but I'm gonna try and do 3. So if you're setting like your internal clock for your like project time, for your drawing time, mine is set in my head at 3 hours. If I can get a decent head going in 3 hours, like I'm gonna be pretty happy about it. The other thing too is actually that we chose like a really, or I chose, a really kind of demanding subject for a quick sketch. As simple as it might seem, actually like guys with more rigid features I find slightly easier to draw fast, because you can just be a lot more like, you just be a lot more choppy with how your halftones are. I just dropped my kneaded eraser. Hang on, folks. All right, I'm back. Let's see. Jonathan Bolton says, would you say this is accurate to your working speed, or would you say this is slower so you can talk while you demo? Your patience is really admirable. Also, I did it. I finished my profile so I can soak in all this live stream goodness. That's good. Yeah, in live streams in general, like it's like way slower than I normally work. Not to like be, not to, there's no excuses about it. It's just that, yeah, like you can do a lot more when you're not like constantly thinking about something else. So I just have to kind of really focus in some moments to get a few things working really well. It's actually why I kind of really labor intensively hit the kind of block-in phase in these live streams, because it's the only time that I'm really going to be able to focus on the evaluation of these features, because it just gets so, like I'm accessing like so many different kind of thoughts that are not exactly related to my task. It's kind of, I don't know, it's something you get used to. I feel like I'm more used to it than when I first started live streaming, but I think you never like fully get all your speed on. Or I never have anyway. It felt like it's like running with like sandbags, a little bit. But it's fun too. Like I really like doing live streams, just because it's a really cool way to kind of get people, I guess, into the studio a little bit. Like this would be how, when I'm working on a portrait with my wife Cornelia, or like when I was in school working with different artists and things. Yeah, like you hang out in the studio and you work and you chat about stuff and whatever, and it's a kind of relaxed atmosphere. And I feel like a lot of people online don't get that. you know, it's obviously a very, we're all like separated in different parts of the world, and it's a little bit difficult to kind of connect, you know, forget about even with COVID and everything, but, you know, like these live streams let you feel like you're kind of in the studio a little bit. Like I said, like hopefully, I mean, that's why like I provide always the source images. I feel like that's a way that you can, you know, just kind of hang out and draw along with me. Maybe you think of a cool question that you want to ask. You know, maybe you don't. It's fine either way. I kind of wish I could ask questions the other way. Like, like, so which, how many of you out there feel like at this point, and type into the comments, so, but at least Proko will be able to know. I won't know, but you guys will be able to tell him. How many of you at this point feel like your proportions are really good in your drawing? That would be a fair question. It's like I said, I feel like a little bit dicey in places here. You know, but I just gotta kind of keep focused and keep going forward, you know, trusting a little bit that what I have done is going to be relatively solid, which is a gamble. Like, you know, and I know, you know what I mean? The things that, it's always the stuff you weren't looking at that was the thing that was kind of going wrong. So stay simplified. I mean, if there's anything, right, if there's all this like talk that's going to happen over like 2 or 3 hours, if there's anything you remember, stay simplified for as long as you can. You know, you're not going to regret spending a little bit more time on the block-in. Like, you just won't. And you'll only become more and more convinced over the years of how valuable it is to have a good block-in, you know? So that's one where your art teachers, just about all of them, are going to tell you this, and they're dead on correct. You know, a good block-in gives your drawing a good chance to be successful. That's the bottom line. Let's see some other questions coming in. MJ Artwork says, this seems to be the first time you've drawn on paper toned in graphite on a live stream. Can you explain your thoughts on drawing this way compared to using white paper and paper toned with ink? Yeah, one of the things that the paper that's pre-toned with graphite does is it gives you already that kind of intermediate value, kind of in between shadow and the highest key lights. And so it kind of expedites the drawing in a way. Now, you can use white chalk to do a similar thing, but the thing about white chalk is it also has its own like technical problems, which is to say, you know, oftentimes your initial application of it isn't so fantastic. And you can, by the way, you can actually combine all these techniques. So you can have paper that is toned with ink, that you also tone with a little bit of graphite, so you can use white chalk with it as well. There's endless combinations that you can have in a drawing to kind of bring up the effects that you want. And like, this is something I'm really big on, is that, you know, drawing has almost as many options as painting does in terms of like the variety of what you can express with it. You know, you just got to get your hands dirty. You got to get to stretching your paper. You got to get to, you know, working with inks and working with different, you know, dispersions of powder in water. Like there's so many different like really fascinating things you can do. You just got to get into them, you know, and kind of, you know, stretch your legs a little bit in terms of, you know, thinking of what's possible with drawing. Now, yeah, like I said, why I chose it here is, like I said, it just tends to expedite things just a little bit. And I wanted to see if I could get this drawing to move forward at least a decent pace. I mean, usually for my live streams, I just kind of understand, like, I'm not going to finish. Like, that's just not going to happen. But I wanted to make sure, you know, I'd have something at the end of it that we could at least say, you know, we either got it to look like the model or we didn't, but at least we can say, you know, that was my my target. like I said, I know I'm not the fastest at drawing in the world. And I could probably be, you know, faster and a little bit looser, but I don't know. Eventually you just kind of discover what you like and what you don't like. And what I tend to like is, you know, a little bit more refinement, you know, for better and or worse. That's what eventually I'm into. Let's see, Kenny Tafoya says, would you say you follow your instincts and observations and not any sort of method like the Loomis head because of experience with the Loomis head? Like, because you've done the Loomis head so much, it's easier to imagine that while you focus on observing. Yeah, no, it's interesting, isn't it? Because as cool as the Loomis head is, I find that sometimes, trying to think of like the right way to put this, because you could just like make a reaction and go like, yeah, I think it's like this or whatever. But I mean, to be fair, like the Loomis head is like a fascinating tool. It's a fascinating technology, really, in terms of, it's almost, I mean, he's made a sculpture, right? A sculpture that helps us conceive of the three-dimensional nature of the head in a super efficient way. Like, I'm not sure if anybody's done a more efficient version of what Loomis did with that head. That being said, I find that when I'm working really observationally, sometimes I find it actually a little bit difficult to kind of wedge Loomis into it. Is that probably that's because like I didn't study, like my initial training wasn't with Loomis, so my outcomes, and by the way, like this is the correlation to make that's really interesting or very useful for you. Your process is in a way tied together to your outcome, right? It would be unrealistic to expect that you would get to, for instance, like a really splashy, slashy, illustrative look by blocking in the way that I'm doing now. Like it's too slow, it's too methodical, it's too simplified to kind of give you that same effect, you know? And so as a student kind of evaluating work, you need to think about, you know, what is the process and what is the desired effect, and see if you can kind of get those two to tie together with each other. And sometimes I just feel like the Loomis block-in, for me, is not the most efficient way to go about getting to where I'm trying to get to. And so I don't use it all the time. I use it sometimes. And the thing is, like, you can use modified versions. It's not like, I mean, probably there is a trademark on the Loomis head, but it's not like you don't have to adhere to like every part of the Loomis head every time you draw a head, you know. Sometimes it's nice to start with that circle, you know, get that kind of side plane sphere, and once you start hitting that temporal line, you know, you can kind of go on to other things. So it's, yeah, luckily for artists and creative types, you know, these things aren't so rigid in their boundaries, you know, in terms of like how you have to use them. You can use Loomis-like methods and still get to a really cool effect. You know, so you don't have to like either do Loomis or not do Loomis. You can take bits and pieces that you find really kind of useful. So I just gotta focus on something real quick here. Hopefully real quick. We'll see. I would like it to be real quick, but you never know. This area of the mouth is really subtle, and it does not benefit me to rush here. So I'm just trying to give it the time it deserves. See if I can get a good block in of it. It's tough, very tough. By the way, yeah, how's it going out there with the proportions? I want to know if you've commented, Proko team, if you're watching the comments, are you getting a large proportion of people saying that they have totally nailed their proportions or not? Please let me know. Or you can put mine in the category and say that I don't feel confident about my proportions yet. So mark me down as one of the People who doesn't believe that they have gotten their proportions. Totally righteous, yeah. Let's see, Draw Before Paint says, I can do decent cast drawings. Should I start doing portraits or copy your drawings? Well, I mean, let's be, you know, you can do any of those things. I mean, before or after doing good cast drawings. I think being able to do good cast drawings is a great step, kind of in the right direction. Where you go after that, I guess, is just kind of, I mean, do you have like a coherent, like, educational plan that you're going by? Or, you know, you just kind of want to, like, if you're asking, like, what did I do after I did cast drawings? I mean, eventually I was always going to be an oil painter, or I trained to be an oil painter. I mean, that's a big part of my job now, is to paint in oil, but I also fell in love with drawing in the process, and so eventually, like, I draw about as much as I paint. So I never actually really, like, stopped doing cast drawings, which my teachers used to, like, make fun of me about. But for me, like, drawing sculpture was always such a great experience. Like, I never stopped enjoying doing it. So I don't know, if you're asking, like, what did I do? I don't know. I never really stopped doing them. I did portraits all the way through, and I did a lot of study of the nude over the years. You know, I mean, it was, you know, something I painted frequently for 10 years. But what should you do now? It just, I mean, it just kind of depends upon what your objectives are, right? Like I said, if you just want to do what I'm doing, I mean, a good way to do that is to access, I mean, to draw the lessons that I put out. You know what I mean? That's why I make them, to kind of tell people exactly what it is that I do that makes my drawings look the way that they do. So that's a kind of great place to start. Whereas, like, if you just want, like, a more broad all-around education, I would say actually it could be very, I mean, it's a very influential thing to actually start painting. And the reason behind that is that what we're doing is, like, with values in drawing, we have to do so slowly. Like, if you know anything about charcoal and graphite, or, well, let's even say, like, really specifically graphite, it does not want to happen fast. Like, nothing about graphite wants to happen quickly, you know? It really benefits you to kind of just slow down and, like, take your time and make the right kinds of assessments and judgments, and just get it in the right place, and don't have to change it. All that kind of stuff. Graphite wants that from you, right? Whereas oil paint, in particular, it's so fast. Like, you can put down a value, as soon as you can pick it up on your brush, you can express it on the canvas. Now, what that does in terms of you, like, understanding drawing is, I think it gives you, like, a more rapid way to grasp the elements of, like, value context. Because, again, like, there's no such thing as, like, oh, this value is correct, right? It's like, is the whole arrangement of values correct? That's what we need to know. And oil paint lets you work with that in a way that's a lot more agile. Like I said, you can make changes in like the snap of a finger. Major changes. Where if you needed to do it in graphite, it's like, okay, we got to erase it, and then we got to start building it up again, you know, and it's going to take all the time that it has to take to kind of build that up. So I would say that if you wanted to really progress, I think starting, and you're saying that you're proficient with cast drawing, going ahead and starting to organize some cast paintings, I think is a really kind of useful place to start, because it's going to give you that extra sense of perspective about value organization, value application, which actually you should take back into drawing eventually. That you should go back, or by the way, people, if you start painting, do not stop drawing. It's not that you graduate. There's this mythology around the school that I went to, that, like, once you started painting, oh, now you were a painter, and drawing had, like, lost its hold over you, that now you were supposed to be Now you're a real artist because you painted or whatever. It's nonsense. You only start to understand drawing better, I think, once you have painted, once you've gotten that, your kind of hands into that. I think keep mixing up your studies and persisting with drawing. It's only going to reward you. You know, it's another thing that is probably uniform in the advices that you will receive from teachers and from artists, is that they all say, keep drawing. Drawing is the place where you start to understand and express things. It's the workshop where your lessons of design really, really start to kind of solidify, and you start to understand them more clearly. Because this is fascinating. This is the thing I love about drawing more than anything else, right? Is how separated it is from nature. Like, take a look at this one up here, right? What do we see? What's the first difference in between that girl there and this girl here, aside from the proportions and design decisions? The first difference is one's completely without color, the other is with color. So in drawing, we have this way that it's separated. It's separate from the real world. It's already kind of divorced from that. It has its own kind of language. And in that, just like a black and white film, I think we evaluate it different. We experience it different than kind of a color film. Oh, you know what? I totally lost the plot. I'm just going to continue talking about why I love drawing. But because it is like separate from what we see, it allows us to, I think, kind of improvise in different ways. It allows us to create kind of different solutions, and also like the slowness of the material. Again, we don't have that fast momentary shock of value application that oil paint gives us. It's a more, to me anyway, like a more meditative process than oil painting is. Oil painting's like all action all the time. And so, you know, someone like me, I could be accused of being an overthinker. I'm not going to be shy about that. You could say I'm an overthinker. That's fine. I think probably a lot of educators can be overthinkers. But I like to sit with something and work with it and slowly kind of figure out what I really think about it, rather than, I don't like to make like a hasty decision about something. And drawing lets me do that in a way. Yeah, I can do it a little bit in oil paint as well, but again, like oil paint also has this issue of like its drying times. Like it's only alive for like a certain window of time. And you need to be as effective as possible within that window of time. If you don't get it done in that window of time, you need to start over. You know, it's like all of you, I'm sure, know about the myth of, is it Sisyphus? The guy where the boulder rolls down the hill and then he's got to push it back up, and at the end of the day, it rolls down the hill again. You know, oil paint's like that, where you have to like almost like start your process over. You need to like reactivate the painting to kind of go back into it. In a way, like drawing, you can just dive in and jump out like at any moment. There's nothing in the way of you doing that, which is another thing that if you're like scatterbrained like me, you'll appreciate, is that drawing is always there, like waiting for you. You know, it's never too late to change that angle or to apply a little bit more value. You know, whereas with oil paint, you can get all sorts of sticky situations that come out of, you know, trying to reactivate just one part and to save the others, you know. So, huge digression. Right, let's see. I'm just take a drink of water and then I got another question here. Kim Stepney says, would you please discuss your concept of shapes further? Could you show us examples of the shapes you have chosen rather than where you would simply copy the picture? What is the difference? Cool question, Kim. Very cool, very insightful, great question. And because it's a great question, of course, by that I mean also it's very challenging to answer. So everything here is already a selection, right? Part of what's cool about artwork in general, I mean, let's forget even about, you know, just saying drawing instruction or whatever it is, right? That we're all trying to do here on the internet. What makes any of this stuff cool and interesting to me is the process by which it happens. And by that I mean, right, in order for this to get out here, I have to look at my source image, which for me is over on this side. I have to look at that, right? I have to memorize the things that are there. I have to memorize it as I see it. And then I might as well close my eyes and come back here, open up to this new reality. And I need to transcribe the things that I remember. This is one giant, elaborate memory exercise. I cannot, it's simply impossible. I cannot look at my source and at my drawing at the same time. So I have to. It necessitates memorization, right? So anything that's the most observational work that you could ever possibly create, it's still a memory exercise. It's still a translation. Now, what does that mean, right, when we say a translation? Now, a translation is a way that it kind of passes through you, and the things that are significant to you, that you remember, that's what you transcribe, right? So if, and I use this metaphor all the time, if we talked about like taking a walk in a forest, right? Let's say I took a walk in a forest and a botanist took a walk in a forest. So a botanist, a plant scientist, right? When I came out the other side of the forest and you asked me, hey, what did you see on your walk? I'd probably say something really generic like, I saw some trees. I saw some moss, perhaps, you know, some rocks, whatever. And you would ask the same question to the botanist. Obviously, he'd talk your ear off. And he'd be saying, oh, we saw this, you know, particular kind of phylum of tree, you know, whatever. You have a whole lot of like technical language which could describe in elaborate detail exactly all of the flora that he witnessed on this walk. Because he's intimately involved with the subject matter, because he's been studying it for ages and ages and ages, because he's been educated in it, so many more things about it would be relevant to him. His memory of it would be so much clearer, so much deeper, right, than mine would be. And I look at portraiture very much in the same way, and it's why I've kind of niched down so much, in that I just feel like there's worlds inside worlds when we're talking about drawing a portrait of another person. You know, so for me, like, all the stuff that maybe on the outside seems like overthinking or like, oh, it's too elaborate or it's too complicated. To me, it's like the tip of the iceberg. I feel like there's so much that you can find and kind of translate in there that can make deeper your associations and make better your memory, and therefore improve your actual portraiture skills, you know, in terms of like just making a picture, a portrait of someone come alive. You know, for me, that's my kind of access point. That's what I find interesting about it in general. Now to go back to the question about shape design, right? Shapes are maybe the language that we use to transcribe the subject. And so they're going to be different at each phase of the process. In the beginning, the shapes need to be like sort of large and rough and deeply planier in order to facilitate the kind of broad swaths of memory and broad problems that we're trying to solve. As time goes on further and further, we need to get more and more subtle. However, right, this is where it gets like super complicated. It's complicated even to talk about. We have something like this, right? Now, you could say that a shape like this, well, why don't you just like outline it? Just draw a big, harsh line around it. Well, because that's not the way like visual phenomenon work, right? That's not the way like the process of drawing works. There's a notion that here that we can talk about that's called being soft but specific, right? So just because we have like gradients and softness doesn't mean that we are removing the sense of like structural, planier, straight-edged or straight-lined design. Like even in the softest shapes like this, there's still that sense of in a way, of geometry. What are we talking about when we say geometry? We're talking about planes. The top, you know, the form above the zygomatic arch is tilting upward. Below the zygomatic arch, tilting downward, right? There's a plane shift that happens there. That's why that looks the way it does, and that's why that contributes to a sense of volume or form in the head. Whew. So all that being said, you know, I think it was Kim Stepney who asked this question, where would I simply copy the picture? I don't even, I guess I don't even really engage that way. I don't think there's anything in the picture that I copy at all. It's just not the way I was trained. I mean, there are entire branches or fields of artwork out there in which that is, what's the word, like specifically the case, that, you know, hyperrealism, you literally, it should just be a facsimile of what's there. But it's interesting and important to me that this is a transcription of what's relevant to me, what is important to me about what I'm seeing. And I know it's all like, you know, deep and artsy or whatever, but that's, I mean, that's my process. That's like how I get through the day in my studio. So I hope that helps to answer the question. Let's see. Abby Graphite says, how can we read from a photo reference that which facial ridges and bulges are flesh, muscle, or bone? And how do we mark each on paper? Cool question. You know, it kind of relates a little bit into the last answer I was giving in that, like, how do you like memorize what's there, what isn't there? How do you, you know, conceive of the shapes that you need to use? I think, you know, a good drawing is going to be a combination of what you know and what you see. It's another one of those areas where, you know, so often I think people that would like to explain things try their best to give you like a binary example that you can either draw what you know or draw what you see, but inevitably, you know, we do a little bit of both of those things. And, you know, because of that, I think you differentiate those things through a preconceived kind of notion of what they are and where they are. I mean, you know, anatomy for me was always a kind of a compass rather than a roadmap. Like it lets you know what should be there so you can understand what is there, you know, and everybody's going to have like, that's the second kneaded eraser that I dropped. I never do that. As I said, of course, I just did it. So I was saying, yes, compass versus a roadmap. So yeah, like anatomy kind of tells you a little bit what should be there so you can understand what is there, and what that does in turn is, I think, allows you to describe it a little bit more clearly. Now that's again in kind of observational work, and all these answers should be taken not with a grain of salt, but with a grain of like, understand that this is where my work is coming from. I obviously never proclaim that everybody else has to do the same as me. It's just how I eventually figured out how to deal with, you know, what I wanted to do in the world of art and expression. So I think it's time to kind of dial in some of these features, whether I really feel like I'm 100% like there or not, whatever. We're at the 2-hour mark, and so I gotta hit it or quit it. I gotta make it happen or not make it happen. So I'm gonna start to indicate some like slightly clearer planes, and hopefully some nice, good and clear shapes where necessary. Right, let's see. Camilo C says, any suggestions on how to improve consistency? Sometimes I sketch something I'm proud of, considering my level. The day after is terrible. Yeah, the unfortunate, like, well, all right, so let me say this. There's one thing that I can say that I know that a lot of students go through and a lot of students do that maybe doesn't help with their consistency, and it's that each day they kind of go about drawing something that is fundamentally different from the other. If there's something that skill building, benefits skill building without a doubt, is repetition, right? Like, think about, nobody wants to hear about a golf swing. So let's say playing the piano. You practice the scales on a piano because it's like a rudimentary, repetitive exercise that allows you to familiarize yourself with where the keys are and what sounds the keys make, and to basically take it from being an active decision-making, like search, into something that is a little bit more perfunctory. It's something that you just do by second nature. And I think what you're describing there, and I think what a lot of people struggle with, is that they don't have like a consistent direction in their practice. So like one day they're drawing a face with a single primary, like, dominant light source, and the next day they're drawing a face that has, I don't know, lights from every possible imaginable direction, and they struggle. And so, like, for me, I think it's rather like natural that without a consistent subject matter, of course, your different applications of effort are going to have like profoundly different results in each of those situations. So I would say, pick a subject matter, pick a lighting situation, and stick with that for a while until you get to understand how it operates, because each one is a little bit different. Each one has different, like, kind of quirks that govern it, and as you start to learn those tendencies and those quirks, you're going to get better at handling them, more efficient at handling them. Each phase of your drawing is going to get better the more that you kind of go through and kind of repeat that process. So don't change all the time what you're working on. Give yourself some consistent practice in an area, in a direction, and see if that kind of bears results. And by the way, by that I mean, I don't want to hear like, oh, I did 2 days in a row of the same drawing and it didn't work. Yeah, like, we're talking months. We're talking like an investment of time in getting these things kind of clarified and understood. Drawing for me was never something that was fast in terms of like the uptake on it. Like, even, I know that when I was educated, I was a pretty talented guy, like, going into the academy, and it took me a long time, I think, to be truly like proficient in what I was doing. Like, I could do some stuff, but to say like, do you really understand it? I don't know. So, just be patient with yourself. And, a big part of the skill that you need to build up is that skill of like showing up. I mean, in a world where that's like, frankly, hard to do, that becomes a virtue, that becomes a skill. And, one of the main things, someone asked earlier about like, career and what career can you have as a quick sketch artist? I mean, maybe that was difficult to answer, but the true thing that I can tell you about careers is that most people quit. Most people don't keep showing up, and eventually that's a dividing line, And the cool thing about that you can understand, is that actually that's really something that you can control. Like, so many things are out of our control. Like, I grew up or born with, whatever, how you want to say it. I had a certain level of talent. By a long shot, I'm not the most talented person that I've known. But also, like, I'm not the least. But what I can say is, like, I can control whether I showed up or not. Like, I can control whether I spent, 15 years, whatever, like, trying to get good at this stuff. I was definitely in control of that, and that is like such it should give you such an empowering sense about your own education, is that you are totally in control of that aspect of it. I guess within reason. I mean, if, God forbid something horrible happened that you couldn't draw, but whatever. For the most part, you're in control of that aspect. All right, we are past the 2 hour mark, and I still feel relatively okay. By the way, I never heard back from the Proko team about whether anybody made comments with respect to how they felt about their proportions. So, John, if you're out there, I know you're out there, give me a heads up on whether people are feeling good about their proportions or not. To update you on how I'm feeling about my proportions. I feel okay. I feel a little bit better. I don't feel like amazingly good about what's happening down here, but I feel better than I did before. And so I'm going to take that as an encouraging sign and keep pushing. All right, John's finally getting back to me. Some people think the proportions are off, but it might be the ankle. No, I'm not talking about my proportions. I know my proportions are off. I'm talking about your proportions at home, all the people that should be drawing along. My proportions, all right, so let me evaluate. I'm having some doubts about this distance here. I think some of it has to do with the height of this nostril. Some of it has to do with the height of the tear duct here. Some of it also has to do with the lack of kind of shapes that I have underneath here. So I think as I kind of start to expand my construction around here, that's going to start to make sense. Another one that I feel a little bit uneasy about is the relationship here. I feel like the mouth actually should come further out, but I just keep having a doubt about that. I mean, maybe I've measured it and it's in a decent place, but that usually means that like something else is off. Like maybe my distance here is not good, you know, like maybe that distance is like way too long, or my eye socket is too short. You know, so it could be any number of different things. So to update the update, I want to hear how you are doing. I know I'm in a mess. I need no further confirmation of that. Or you can tell me or not, whatever, it's up to you. But I want to hear like how your drawings are going in your studios at home. All right, Mao's is commenting saying, my proportions keep being too much aligned to the rule of thirds due to not observing it enough. That was another thing that, all right, so like real talk, you know, in terms of like Loomis stuff, that's where I kind of get off the train a little bit, is like when you talk about proportions being like a particular way, I never got totally comfortable with that for a variety of reasons. I think when you draw observationally, you know, you always find, and this is just like in general, right, that you'd hear some really awesome sounding rule about how nature has to be. All shadows look like this. And then you go into the model room, and inevitably, the first thing you would see is a shadow that didn't look the way that it was supposed to look. And it would kind of throw into question like this, but you know, the rule is that ... this is supposed to happen. And I always felt that a little bit about like the kind of rule of thirds stuff. And I know it's not so rigid like that it's like, oh, it has to be this way. But I always felt like for me, like that it suggested that you could think that way. It suggested that in observational work, you could rely on some like canon of proportions. And more often than not, I did not find that super productive. Hey, other people really do. And this is where, you know, we get onto one side of an argument or another, and everybody goes like, oh, it's just because you're narrow-minded observational approach. Whatever, like, I mean, I just didn't find a lot of utility in it for me. That's okay, you can find utility in it. But I'm just giving like my reason why I never really fully got on board about the rule of thirds. I mean, I know it's like a thing and I understand how it works, but I just don't, it's not like a thing that I use, at least not in any kind of strict sense. Like I know the head is kind of generally shaped a certain way and that it has a general set of proportions, but nothing that I ever just felt like the need to articulate on a paper. I just thought I could do some things more efficiently by studying the proportions in the situation exactly as they were. So that's my take. I feel like I'm gonna like come in for like internet criticism for that. But whatever, you know, you gotta be true to yourself. Ah, wait a minute. We actually have a drawing coming in on the Slack chat, and I think it's from Mouse, and he says, "I'm not sure about my proportions. I think her nose is possibly too big. I may have not properly turned the head." Yeah, it seems like Mouse, and this is like nobody else can see this except me and Mouse, and maybe a few people on the Proko chat, but yeah, it seems like you've got like too much eye on that side. So you've turned her head a little bit more towards us. Which is always like kind of a good thing to kind of keep track of, is like how much distance you're showing like outside the center line, because it's one of the big ways that we can create like an inappropriate sense of the proportion of the head. So I'm just trying to see if I can get into some of the sense of like structure and design that I want to have in this. We're going into the third hour, people. Like, I'm on board for it. My voice might not be on board for it, but I'm on board for it. I'm going to try and push forward and see like where I can go. I'm going to say like I'm not particularly optimistic about how far I'm going to get, but we're going to find out anyway. We're going to see where it comes to. Like I said, I always think it's like a bit hard with, especially with, you know, like female faces that are maybe a little bit more subtle, you know, male faces can be a bit gruff, a bit, you know, kind of angular. But I feel always have to be a little bit more subtle in designing a woman's features than necessarily with a guy's. I mean, that's not, by the way, let's not like count that too much. I mean, guys, you have to be quite clear with the structure of their faces as well. But that additional bit of like angular design, I feel like it helps you keep track of the structure a little bit more easily. Whereas with a female face, I'm always like softening a little bit of an angle or something, and that leads me to lose sometimes sense of clarity or structure. I feel like I'm under pressure now. Now that we're in the third hour, it's like I gotta be somewhere, you know? I think she's got too much chin, for sure. There's too much going on down there. There's too much distance. I need to measure that. All right, so should be the nose is roughly equivalent to the length there. Yeah. Look at that. Talk about expected levels or degrees of inaccuracy. I just had to wipe out like 3 or 4 millimeters. Wow. Bad example, right? Maybe it's a good example. Listen, you should be willing to make changes in your drawing. You shouldn't imagine that everything's perfect and just go with it. You know, so in that sense, maybe I am performing an instructive service by showing you that. But yeah, for sure, you know, when you feel something's off, you just gotta roll it out. You just gotta bite the bullet and make the change. I mean, because in general, I'm not for like portraiture that has to always be like totally referential. You know, I've seen a lot of, you know, portraits that by artists that I really love, that I know and they know and everybody knows that the model didn't look like that. So like that's fine. But it's one of those things where, like I always tell my students, that you should be able to call on it when you need it. You know, it's fine to like, you know, improvise and express and like do different stuff and experiment and all that, but it's like when like By the way, I say like a lot. I'm sure it annoys a segment of the population. That's fine. But I just want to say, like, you should be able to call upon that sense of strict representation when it's required and not give yourself like any, what's the word, like any free pass, especially when you're a student on, as students. And listen, once again, I'm just going to say, I am saying this because I absolutely did this. Students love a good reason why they aren't doing something that they should be doing. I loved it. I know it's continuing generations of students love it. There's always like a good reason why there's some fundamental thing that we're not doing. And when like an instructor, something calls you on it, you're like, oh, but it's because ... I always had a reason. I always had great reasons why I wasn't doing the thing I was supposed to be doing. But the fact is, like, there's gonna come a time when you gotta do it or not do it, and if you can't, then you can't. But that's because you didn't practice. So making changes like that when you need to, practicing making changes like that when you need to, it's super important, and it's definitely a thing that's gonna like benefit you in the long run in terms of your own like versatility and flexibility. Let's see, the questions have stopped rolling in. Oh, and yeah, sorry, the drawing that I was talking about is from Mark, not from Moaz. So correction on that last one. But all right, so let's see. I usually take it that when the questions dry up, that you guys are done. And so I'll usually like kind of end the stream when I feel like it's, I mean, we've been drawing for a little while, haven't we? And you've been listening to me say like and this and that for a couple hours. So maybe you're getting wrapped up. I still feel like I still got some energy for this. I'm gonna keep going. Unless John or Stan tells me, that I'm done, that they're shutting me off. I'm gonna keep going for a little while. Let's see. Devora is asking, how should I practice drawing heads if I'm just starting out? It's a really cool question, actually, because, and it's one that I think sometimes there's some traps or some pitfalls in this. Starting out, one of the things that I think you need to figure out how to do really well is actually how to make a good block in. Now, the mistake that you can make, and I think a lot of students do make this, is that they start out wanting to make like a really refined drawing. And so they'll start by doing a drawing where they're going to take like, it's going to take like 20 hours to resolve the drawing. Well, by the time like a beginning student has spent, I don't know, 4 hours, 3 hours on a drawing, they've probably already made enough mistakes to ensure that the final outcome is not going to be like a totally satisfactory one. This is not me being mean. It's just, this is my honest take on what happens with students. It happened to me plenty of times. What I think that you want to practice as a student is many starts. So, give yourself a good long day, right, to kind of focus on a drawing, let's say 3-4 hours. And when you're done with your 3 or 4 hours, self-evaluate, compare it with other works that you like or whatever it is, whatever your reference point is, compare it with that. Compare it with your teacher or the other students that are working on it. And then just close the chapter. Go on to the next day and start a new drawing. And I think you do that 20, 30 times, you have then like maybe a foundation that could let you proceed to a drawing that's a little bit more involved. That's my take on it. So as a beginning student, you really need to practice your starts, and that's going to be your block-ins, and that's going to be the first phase of the drawing, which is going to take, roughly, 2-3 hours. All right. So John is also asking me to remind all of you how to post your drawings. Don't forget, right? So if you've been drawing along and you're doing your study and you want some feedback on it, Stan and the Proko team have got a whole group of critiquers that they have hired to basically like to travel the website and check out what everybody's doing and give out like kind of comments and practical feedback and things. And so you can post your drawing on the assignments tab, which is also where you can download this source image. So post your images there and get feedback. Whenever I'm done with this drawing, if I don't just collapse from talking for this long, I'm also going to be there, like adding some comments and just chatting with all of you and checking out the work that you did during the stream. So make sure that you, believe me, these opportunities for receiving good feedback online, they don't come along every day. So take it because it's there, and post your drawing in the assignments tab and get feedback about what you've been up to. We got more quick sketches coming in. Dana's asking, I had trouble painting the subject in the shadow. Could you help? Well, understanding shadow and light is all about like understanding like the nature and operation of shadow and light, right? Like, so we need to first kind of actually define shadow shapes. We need to define light shapes and understand maybe how to organize them as like parts of the drawing. Now that sounds like it's kind of a simple thing, but honestly, I've done 3-hour lectures on just how to understand light and shadow and constructing that relationship. So I'm not going to say it's simple, but the basic idea is that we need to determine the direction of the light source, so the planes of the face that will be receiving light and those which will not be receiving light, and begin to define the boundary in between the two. So that's where you kind of start out in terms of wanting to solve that problem, how to draw the shadow. Then we talk about actually how to render the shadow. Shadows as a whole will tend to be relatively continuous in their value, which is to say that we're not going to have highlights like this poking out of the shadows. The only reason why this drawing kind of works from a shadow and light perspective is because the shadow, though not particularly dark, is uniformly darker than the lightest lights. So that's like another thing that you can kind of start to understand. But saying that, I mean, real talk. You know, I have made for my Patreon subscribers a series of lectures about just about this, just about how to organize the stuff that you see and how to understand the stuff that you see. So in general, just try to separate your darks and your lights. In specific, you know, invest in learning about concept of like light and shadow and how what properties they possess and how they exist, and therefore like how you can kind of organize them and simplify them, right, and translate them into a drawing. Kenny Tafoya is saying, not a question, but I did want to say that I'm absolutely loving this and hope you'll be doing this more often. It's great to hear someone knowledgeable in the field talk about his craft. Kenny, I appreciate you, man. Thank you. I really like to do live streams. I do a lot on my YouTube channel as well, which is just Stephen Bauman artwork. If you want to check it out there, I actually do live streams like this at least once a month. Obviously, Stan, such an amazing guy, amazing artist, amazing teacher. It's been really helpful to me in kind of learning about how to like reach out and do this online. So, you know, I mean, if he asks me back, then I'll be doing more streams. But if not, you can always catch me on my channels as well. Let's see, what am I doing here? I feel like all this is too light. You know, another thing you want to do, and you'll see me doing this a lot, which probably looks weird if you don't know what's going on, but you'll see me like squinting down a lot, right? Now, what happens when you squint down is you actually kind of compress the values that you're seeing. So it appears to be values sometimes that are quite diverse. When you squint down, you actually see them as being a little bit closer together. So what I'm doing is kind of like testing the unity that I'm producing in my values by kind of squinting down and just kind of double checking to see where I might be making things too light. Like, for instance, the upper eyelid that's traveling in between the actual eyeball and the shadow in the inner upper corner of the eye socket, it actually doesn't stand out that much from the values around it. Now, I was just kind of like assuming that, this is the other thing, this is a really cool thing too. Your drawing is made out of your assumptions, right? You saw something, you memorized something, and according to what you saw, you transcribed it on the paper. Now, if you never double check yourself, you're going to fall into that like classic trap of being like an unreliable narrator, right? Your first impression of what's going on there is not always the most accurate thing. So you need to go back and like check and double check. And it's actually in a way, it's the brilliance of language, that we have this transcription of our reflections that we can go back to and we can read over them, test them for their strengths and weaknesses, maybe even get down to some truths that we didn't understand before. So there's a lot of like fascinating things. And I mean, drawing is like this, it's this bottomless well of interesting stuff. Like if all you can find as a student is the right questions to ask, I think you can do so much. You can really do so much with that. It's without those questions, of course, then that you have an incredible challenge ahead of you, because this is what I would tell all the time to advocates for people being like self-taught and everything. I think it's fine to be self-taught, but you're basically reinventing the wheel. There's already a wheel out there. There's already a set of shoulders that you can stand on top of and get to where you're going a lot faster. You want to talk about like starting to make the artwork that you want to make. If you can expedite your learning, if you can expedite your understanding of what this stuff is, well, you're going to get a lot faster also to making the artwork that you want to make as well. So that's my high horse that I will jump off of now. I start lecturing everybody about learn your fundamentals. But hey, man, I believe it, so that's what it is. Let's see. Arya, cool name. Arya Pandey says, what do you feel about strictly studying from books? I wish to blend both my observations as well as the teachings of great artists like Byrne Hogarth and so. But oftentimes I can't really pay equal attention to both sides. What are your thoughts on this? Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? And it's that question that you get, I think, a question all the time online, with students and people on live streams and things. Really the question you get all the time is what books do you recommend about X, Y, and Z? And a lot of times, I don't have like a tremendous amount to say about what books can best have. I mean, by the way, all the books out there are good books. Like, there's not a single art book that I've come across where I thought, this does not contain anything. What? Sorry, I'm getting some weird comments from Stan on the Slack channel. I said something offensive about Skelly or something. I don't know what I did. I'm sorry, everybody. But in terms of like paying attention to books versus, like learning from observation, obviously, I mean, they're going to inform each other. I think you definitely have to have an ear open to each one. And I found, like, for instance, like my own experience with, we all know the great books by Bridgman, right? It's amazing, like, books on anatomy and construction and stuff. And when I was a student, or even like before I was a student, I found them totally impenetrable. I could honestly hardly understand a single thing about them. And so for me, I actually needed to learn a lot more about drawing before I could actually unpack, you know, what Bridgman was going on about. So I think what you're going to do, or what you're likely to experience, is this kind of curve where you read and you apply. I mean, remember this too, right? Drawing and painting are practical knowledge. I said a little bit earlier, right? I was talking to some students, I was talking about how students will talk about, you know, or bring up reasons for why they did or didn't do something they were supposed to do. You know, if you can apply the idea, then you understand it. If you cannot apply the idea, then the knowledge that you have of it is only theoretical. And that's fine. I mean, you know, knowledge can start as theoretical. I'm not saying don't learn theory. I'm saying that apply the theory, and that's how you'll understand, like, the value of it, right? How you understand the practicality of it, because it needs to get into your hand, it needs to get into your paper, you know, and into your drawings. It's what I think one of the amazing things that Stan does. He makes practical the learning of anatomy. Like, so many, oh my goodness, so many students learn so much, like all this like theoretical anatomy knowledge, and it's like, I used to be an anatomy teacher. I'm just saying, like, for me, I understand if it doesn't make its way into your drawings, I think that maybe it's of a dubious value. That's all I'm saying. So yeah, that's my take on it. I hope that was coherent. All right, let's see. Yeah, so apparently somebody has drawn a weird drawing and is provoking Stan in the caption, and that's what I was thinking about. Oh, and that I skipped Skelly's drawing for feedback. I don't think I'm going to be giving feedback on that one. I feel like that's, I mean, what could I improve about that one? By the way, for those of you watching on YouTube, just to explain, this is a live stream that is in support of Stan's launch of his new website, Proko 2.0. And on that website right now, you can submit your drawings from this live stream and get feedback from instructors on Proko's site. And one of the drawings is very provocative. It's provoking Stan. Maybe Stan actually drew that. Just FYI, maybe that's what's happening, everybody. We'll never know. So once again, I'm seeing that the questions are maybe drying up a little bit. And that maybe means that people's attention is drying up a little bit. And maybe that means this live stream is coming towards its conclusion. I still feel like there's a little bit more structure in this face that I can extract, but it's slow going. Maybe I have a little bit more in me. Marco Ambriz says, "Hi Stephen, how do you decide where to add the thick accents or outlines to the contours found in your works?" Yeah, it's a cool question. You know, in general, my line quality is pretty orchestrated. It's pretty organized. And actually, if you want a full response about it, actually I did an interview with Stan. It's still on the Proko YouTube channel. Or actually, if you go to also on Proko.com, I have an instructor page. So if you go there, you can also see all the videos that I have that are on the site. And in one of them, I think it's the one about like two anatomy nerds talking. I actually explain in depth the way that I organize kind of line quality in my work. Like I said, it's very technical and it's very specific. But basically, you're talking about the, lines that indicate the continuation of a form and lines that indicate the ending of a form or beginning of a form. So if you have a boundary here, what we're saying basically is that this is the forehead and this is not the forehead. The forehead ends at this boundary. We have a series of value shapes that come after this, but none of them have that kind of linear boundary, right? At least definitely not the one that is like this. And so what I'm saying is that the forehead, this form continues. Now we come over to here where we have this edge, which is very different from this one, right? It's a softer edge. I'm saying that the light is stopping here. So think about it like if you are familiar with like maps, right? Like a map has a key, and the key tells you how the map works, like what is being represented, whether it's a continental boundary or the boundary of like land ending or a topographical, like a change in height of the topography in that area. A drawing is not different in that you need to have consistent signals in each part of it. So if that's what the ending of the form looks like, then the endings of forms should all look like that, or should all at least send like a similar signal. And that's how I choose basically like where to put a particular kind of edge or particular kind of line, is I rely on basically what am I trying to communicate with that edge or line. This is hard, man. This is hard. That lip is giving me problems. Jonathan Bolton says, false. If his live stream was 6 hours long, I'd be here for it. Okay. So I'm gonna keep pushing. I mean, obviously, listen, there's a ton of work that I could do to this one to improve it. Whether I will get it over the line, no pun intended, in the time that we have, well, we'll see. We'll see what comes of that. But I'm going to keep pushing a little while longer. Let's see. So Stan is persisting with his comments about the provocative drawing on his site. He says it's a liger, which I'm vaguely aware of from the movie Napoleon Dynamite. And apparently Skelly says the only thing drying up is I had to cut out the rest. Apparently there was some not safe for work comments going on in the Slack stream. This is the behind the scenes stuff that everybody wants to know about Proko 2.0. It's like who's back there in the Slack stream cursing. All right, wait, so Sam Reeves, I missed a question here. So Sam Reeves is asking, what is a good way to train your eye to see simplified shadow shapes? Or conversely, when should you avoid merging shadows? This is a kind of cool question. And training your eye to see simplified shadow shapes, it's actually really a lot more about understanding shadow and light than it is about necessarily seeing shadow and light. Now maybe this is my provocative statement, right? Now, like on the first day at the Florence Academy, you walk in the door, right? And this is where I taught for many years. You would be told that you're going to start drawing shadow shapes. And the shadow shape that you draw on day one is dramatically different from the shadow shape that you draw on day 110, right? After you've been there for whatever, a trimester. And what this means is that you have learned better how to actually see the shadow shapes that we're talking about, and also better how to describe them using the material that you're using. So learning kind of how to see them is only like the first part of it. In a sense, you then need to learn how to categorize them, and then you need to learn how to design them. So seeing them is just about understanding the lighting situation, which I say just, but it's complex in its own right. So how to understand lighting situations. I mean, you have to think about like primary dominant light and secondary lights, reflected lights, ambient lights, room lights, all these different categories of lighting that can affect your subject. You learn about the behavior of all those, and then you can analyze like how the light in your lighting situation is affecting your subject. At that point, then you could start to determine something useful about the design of shadow shapes. So it's not, like I said, it's a little bit of a not a misnomer, that's not the right word, but it's a little bit of a not exactly the right idea that it's only learning to see them. It's also a matter of like learning, the context of the light and how, basically like how that affects the form. So the interaction of light and form is really what we're talking about here. Once you start to learn that, then the shape design like comes from that. I think it's like I get this complaint from students a lot. I was like, I can't see the shapes. I don't know how to see shapes and this and that. And it's like, no, like, I mean, everybody sees the shapes. Like everybody has the same eyes and we're all seeing the shapes. It's not that. It's not about actually learning to see them. It's learning to like categorize them and understand them and understand the nature of them, what they do and what they don't do. So that's what we're talking about. Let's see. All right, well, there's no questions at the moment, so I actually I can kind of focus on the vast needs of my drawing. Oh my goodness. See, this is why I didn't get into all that like hair stuff around here, is I can barely like digest all the stuff that's happening here. Yeah. Portraiture is like one of those things that like it feels like it's simple until you do it, and then you're like, oh my goodness. It's like a world of knowledge that you have to understand to really get there, MJ Artwork is asking, hi Stephen, you're implementing the 3-tier value structure that you explain in your block-in videos. Yeah, I mean 3-tier, I think that's probably one of the hard things to understand for students, is that when we say like, teachers will say you use about 3 values. We're talking about kind of 3 value groups, and here this is a bit of a mashup in the sense that we have like shadow values, we have highest key light values, and then we have like an intermediate value. But then there's also like all sorts of other like leftover in-between values that seem like they're kind of in neither of those groups or in both of those groups. And some of it, by the way, like to be perfectly honest, some of it's just a matter of what I can and can't get to during a live stream. It's as much as it's probably just me drawing, it's also takes a lot of energy to talk. I don't know if any of you out there, if you have jobs or tasks in life where you find yourself talking for about 3 hours straight, it's like you feel like you don't have any oxygen left in your lungs at the end of it. And that's how I'm feeling now. But yeah, it's basically just another version of going from the broad to the specific. I mean, how many value groups are there in the face? Well, there's many. I mean, if you just really kept pushing and pushing and pushing into further and further complexity, you could continue finding more and more kind of groups of values and diverse values and so on. But you can also kind of choose to focus on just a few kind of simple value groups, like I've done here, right? Like the darks are not particularly dark. The lights are only as light as the kind of paper will allow. So again, it's a little bit of a kind of a simplified version, but it's also not like, I guess probably it's just the best way to say it is to say it's 3 values. The reality is it's only 3 values from a kind of conceptual perspective. At least as far as like this drawing is concerned, for instance, I'm not actually literally making it out of 3 values. Let's see. Arutz is asking, what aspect of classical training do you think is least represented with online learning? That's a cool question. Least represented. Maybe we can say like the most difficult to replicate. One of the things I think that is like hardest for online students is that they don't have a building necessarily to go to where they're demanded to be at work with everybody else for X amount of hours. There's that pressure that requires you to work when you are maybe doing an in-person workshop or you're studying at a proper atelier. You know, that part I think is one of the most difficult ones for a student to kind of manufacture. So basically, you know, you need to be a self-starter to study online. You need to be ready to just make it happen on your own. Now, I go to great lengths to try to bridge that gap just because I'm so aware of it, you know, because again, where I trained, this was the norm. But like part of the reason I do live streams where, you know, I'm including the source image is that I expect that you folks out there will be drawing along with me. And that means that you'll have like that sense of that little bit of extra like motivation, you know, that, oh, at X time, you know, I'm supposed to be here drawing this thing. So I'm going to show up and I'm going to have my paper ready. You know, and there's some like incentive, some schedule that you can say demands your time, because that's really, what do you need to become like a good artist? You need time. It's not going to happen fast. You need to keep working and applying yourself, sometimes just in the dark. Sometimes it'll feel like nothing's happening. I mean, that's just the reality, you know? It's like watching your own hair grow. Sometimes you just don't even notice it. But the sure thing is that if you're spending your time drawing, right? If you're getting your pencil on the freaking paper, then it's happening. Progress is happening. I promise you it is. It doesn't always seem like it. Somebody else was asking earlier, like, how do you know when you've like progressed, or how do you know when you're ready to do this or ready to do that? You know, it's hard because it's hard to know, like it's hard to maybe totally understand where you're at. Either you'll be overconfident and you'll think, I know all this stuff, like I did when I went to school. Or you'll be like overly critical, overly self-critical, and you go like, I don't know anything, my drawings are horrible. I mean, the truth of that is that it's probably neither of those things. You're probably not the worst because it takes all types, and you're probably not the best because there's been a lot of really talented people that have come before you. So, you know, you can rest assured that by working, you will make progress. By making progress, you will get a little bit closer to your goal. You know, each time that you draw, each time that you work, you know. And it's just a matter of like how many people can put together that much time, that much effort over time, you know, and kind of stick with it. I say a lot that, you know, if you had one quality, you know, there's always like, the internet is always full of these questions like, what one thing would you take to a desert island? Or what one thing does an art student need? Or whatever it is, you know. And obviously more often than not, it's like, it's actually some quality rather than something. But for art students, for sure, it's being tenacious. Like it's having that sense of being able to not quit despite consistent failure. Because the reality is like the gap that exists between what you want something to be and what it is will always be there. And actually, like the better you get at this stuff, in fact, usually the bigger that gap can become because you know what's possible. So if you're not satisfied with your work, it doesn't mean, oh, your work is trash. It just means there's a gap between what you're able to do, what you're able to see and what you're able to do. And then at that point, you share that with like literally every artist ever born. So you can go ahead and stop considering it to be like a some commentary on your failings. It's more just recognition of a reality. You know, we're unable to be perfect. It's just not the way it works. But we're able to push through that and remain optimistic and hopeful, despite the fact that we don't always feel like we're like meeting the goal that we set for ourselves. Tenacity, people, more than anything else, that is the common thing that I see in successful art students. Not that anybody asked me that question, but I thought I'd answer it anyway. Phyllis Riley says, I hope you won't be offended, but I just had to tell you that my very sick and old dog, Maltese, calms down and naps when she hears your voice. I think that is fantastic. And I'm a huge, absolutely enormous dog lover myself. So if I am contributing in some way to a positive experience for a dog, nothing would make me happier than that, Phyllis. So thank you for that. Now, if there's any humans out there that feel that I'm doing the exact same thing, then maybe I need to reassess. But as long as it's just dogs that I'm putting to sleep, then I'm totally fine with that. All right, so people, we are coming up. It is happening. We are coming up on the 3-hour mark. And I feel just as far behind on this drawing as I did at 2 hours. But, you know, such is life, right? No, I mean, there's been a little bit of progress, but, you know, this is usually where, you know, I'd be like digging in and starting to get into, you know, some of the shadow shapes and like kind of pushing the drawing forward from a value perspective, but I kind of set myself a target that I wasn't going to mess around with like values too. I'm not going to get like a full value. I mean, that's just unrealistic to think I'm going to get a full value drawing out of it. So I just thought, if I can get a few good shapes, you know? And I mean, that's, by the way, and that sounds like not a lot, right? I think that, take it from me, I think that's a lot. To get a few good shapes, to get a few good sort of forms going in 3 hours, that's not bad. You know, to get a degree of accuracy, you know, it's, I mean, that's fine to me. If I can get that, I'm quite happy. Okay, Marco Ambriz says, hi, Stephen. Thanks for answering my previous question. I really appreciate it. If it's okay to ask another, how do you keep a blending stump from making your shading look smudgy or blotchy? Every time I use it, it makes the areas I apply it to look smudgy and I lose my unity. Hey, man, you are not alone. You are probably with the majority in that. And it's why, by the way, like art teachers throughout all of time are like telling students, don't use a stump, don't use a stump, don't use a stump. Because overusing a stump or over relying on a stump to create a value or an evenness in value is the first way that you can ensure that you will not get good even values. And so really it's about the proportion of your reliance on it, which is to say that a stump is there to get pretty good values to look a little bit better. It's not there to get, you know, poor values or bad applications of value to look great. It just doesn't work that way. It's a helper rather than something that maybe plays too active a role in the actual creation of values. All a stump can do is just fill a little bit the gaps. So when you see me using it, usually what I'm doing is just taking a value that's already pretty smooth and making it a little bit smoother. And a stump is pretty good for that. What it's not going to do is take you from values that are really meh into any place where you have like good values. And you see it all the time when you're just stumping and stumping and stumping and stumping and stumping. What happens is you get this like this particular kind of like patchy effect. I don't really know how to call it, but it's always going along with somebody that's like kind of over stumping. So you just got to be judicious and focus on your initial application of value, and then use the stump to maybe connect the dots. But that's the most that it's going to do for you. Whew. All right, people. 5 minutes until we've gotten to 3 hours, and then I think at 3 I gotta go. I think I just gotta go take a chill pill and just like relax for a minute and accept the fact that I will only get so far with this drawing. I mean, I don't know. It's not a great drawing. It's okay. I mean, probably the pressure of time made me want to push it forward a little bit more than it could bear, but I don't know. You get up tomorrow and you do another one. That's like the good thing about drawing is you always know like there's another sheet of paper out there, right? You can just get on to the next. Like the worst thing that happens when you do a bad drawing is that you crumple it up, and over time you start to realize that's not such a big consequence. Seems big at the start. Seems big when you've like it's one of those things where it's just like a thing about quantity. Like when you've done 5 drawings in your life, it seems really tragic to throw one of them away. You've done like 500, it's like, meh. You'll get on to the next. Yeah, there's always another piece of paper out there. Remember that. Let's see. The Cyan Knight says, what is the most important fundamental to learn? Observational skills, anatomy, gesture, perspective, construction. Yes to all of them. I'm such a believer. I'm honestly such a believer in getting yourself versatile, right? Getting yourself to be smart across the board. I think that is there's no greater asset than that, right? Because what that's going to do, this is another one, man. This is another one that's killed me in art school, right? Is you would hear things like, oh, you need to be like more confident with your brush strokes or whatever it is, right? So I went to art school before I went to an atelier. So like I went through this nebulous space of like, I had a painting teacher who was a nice, really nice guy, whatever, but he was like a splatter painter, and I wanted to paint representationally. And so it was this weird space where I feel like I was like at school, but I was not at all getting like the education that I thought was supposed to happen. It was just like, yeah, things like, oh, you should paint, with more confident brushstrokes. What does that even mean? Like, then you think about, well, how do you get confident about something? Well, I'm generally more confident when I know what I'm doing. Like I always used to think about it like when I would start work I used to work at restaurants when I was in college. When I start work at like a new restaurant, like, right, and you don't know where this thing is, you don't know where to put that away. If you need something, you don't know where to get it. You don't even know how to get out of the way when like everybody's like rushing around the kitchen. So how do you feel in that moment? You feel really unconfident. I feel like, oh, I don't know anything. I don't know where to be, where to stand, what to do. I don't know anything. And so you're very unconfident. Well, in time, you start to figure all those things out. Oh, when I'm rushing around the kitchen and I need to stop and check my receipts or something, I can stand over here and be out of the way, but still like not have to go too far. I know where to go if I need to more like ketchup refills or whatever. Like I know where to get that, you know, and you get into this rhythm and you feel confident, you feel good, you feel like you know what you're doing. So what we're saying then is we're making this equivalency between confidence and basically like know-how, like just knowing what you're doing. And so I feel like when you ask what's like one like important thing to do is, man, you got to focus on everything, get it all, and then like maybe after you've got it, you can start to decide like where is it most applicable. But you know, I've never found, you know, the piece of information or the concept that wasn't valuable to understand. Even, you know, like I was talking earlier about, you know, like the three head, or, you know, the rule of thirds in the head or whatever, and how I don't really like that. I still know it. Like I still took the time to, you know, like read up a little bit about it and kind of, you know, take a look at the conceptual drawings that are made with that in mind. You know, it's all worth knowing. There's always some like nugget of knowledge or truth that you didn't expect to find that you're going to find when you're doing that kind of research. Now, if you're talking about like order of importance, this maybe we can talk about, because this used to happen all the time when, you know, I taught anatomy for about 5 or 6 years at the academy, and it was a great time. You know, I loved doing it when I was doing it. You know, I'm also, you know, I'm happy to not be doing it necessarily anymore either. Just as it's really, really technical and it's really comprehensive, and in some ways, you know, it's some ways it's really challenging to teach. Part of the problem that I found was that the core curriculum was meant to be given to like beginning students. So you'd come in and like on your first, you know, whatever, your first year, your first term, you're being put through anatomy courses. And I told you before also about my feeling about anatomy is that it's got to be practical. It's got to be in your drawing. If it doesn't make it into your drawing, then it's just this like appendix. It's this knowledge that just sits on the side and we're not doing anything with it. So, you know, if you're spending your time learning it, you should be learning to put it in a drawing. So the problem was I was getting first year students that actually didn't know how to draw yet. So I'm asking them to learn, you know, through drawing, to learn this like practical science. And I always felt like the level of drawing was not sufficient to actually grasp like the learning that was supposed to be taking place. Long story short, we eventually switched it to a second year curriculum so that people who were going through it actually could draw a little bit better, and so had like better assimilation of the knowledge. So yeah, there are some things about like techniques of drawing that I think would be very interesting to know before you started to learn about, say, anatomy, for instance. It's not to say that you can't do it the other way around, but just if you had to choose, like if I had to select which one you would learn first, I would say you'd learn your basic kind of fundamentals of drawing, shadow and light, organization of values, you know, actual application of medium. That's another thing too, is people like a lot of times students will like switch mediums like all the time. Like today it's gouache, the next day it's oil paint, the next day it's, I don't know, whatever else, the next day it's spray paint, you know. And what happens is you're like changing the variables every single time, and that's, you're giving yourself like a higher like wall or higher like kind of barrier of entry, you know, by changing up those variables. If you just stuck with the one material and learned all the ins and outs of how that works, then I think you would learn a little bit better how to apply value with graphite, right? You know, I mean, because they're separate issues. Like how graphite works and how values work, you know, they're not intrinsically like tied to each other. You know, I mean, you can express values in any number of different mediums. Graphite is just graphite, and it works the way that it works. And it wants to do some things and it doesn't want to do other things. So a little bit of consistency, I think, goes a long way in terms of materials you use. And also, you know, the better you know the material you're using to study the concept, I think the faster it's going to get into your hands, so to speak. Let's see. All right. right. Oh yeah. So I think listen, people out there. I think I'm at the end of my rope. I still actually want to keep drawing, but I don't know if I have it in me to keep talking too much. But I'm gonna that way I'm gonna get my housekeeping stuff in at the end now, and then if I keep drawing, great. If not, great too. But I do want to say, by the way, thanks for being here on Proko 2.0. I think Stan's doing such an amazing job with all this stuff. And I know that everybody that's going to be learning here is going to be having a friggin' great time doing it. If you want to find my instructor page on Proko.com, it's Stephen Bauman artwork, or maybe even just Stephen Bauman, I don't remember which. But on that, you can also find all the courses. Like I made one course with Stan, so he came to my studio in Jersey City and filmed with me. And we had a great time doing that, made a really great demo. And also I made some other courses that are up there as well. So you can also check those out. The interface, like the user interface that you're gonna have on this new website is fantastic. It really, really helps you get through the courses. So if you really loved all this stuff, that's fantastic. There's so much more. I have so many online courses out there. So if there's anything that I'm doing that you think you want to figure out, believe me, it's out there to be learned. So stop by my user profile on Proko.com. And also don't forget, by the way, listen, people, it's free critiques going on today. That's not a thing that happens. So after this live stream ends, you've got a team of people working on Proko.com, hired by Stan, to go out there and just give feedback on people's work. So if you were drawing from this along with me, you've got that option. So post it on the assignments tab where this live stream is going on Proko.com. If you're watching on YouTube, hop over to Proko.com now and you can post your assignment there. And you get feedback. I'm gonna start getting around there and like kind of checking out what's going on, because I've been obviously so, preoccupied with what I'm doing. I didn't really get to see any of the posts, but I kind of like to see what's happening. And yeah, I mean, I guess there's going to be a lot of like programming coming up. So, this is I think the first kind of stream, the first event for Proko's launch. And there's going to be a lot more where that came from. So, yeah, just, thanks people for showing up and listening to me waffle on for like 3 hours and try my best to make a drawing in that time. But I think I'm going to roll out. I'm going to go. I think I gotta close up shop here. Because I need to stop talking for a minute. And I can't. I'm on fire. I'm talking too much. People, everybody, thank you. Take good care of yourselves. And